Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Troutdale Budget Committee for Monday, April 17th, 2023. If we can have a roll call, please.
Mayor Lauer.
Here.
Councilor Ritma.
Here.
Councilor Caswell. Councilor One.
You got the thumbs up.
Councilor White.
Here.
Councilor Richmond. Councilor Glantz.
Present.
Sheriff Stephenson.
Present.
Jean Bent.
Here.
Chris Barney. Victoria Rizzo. Here. Rich Allen.
You come and sing. Okay, with that, we have a call.
All right, it's me, and I'm sorry for those of you who can't actually see my face at this second, because I'm waiting for my computer to log into the internet here. But I am on a large chart up there, which is really good.
Can I just put you on the form?
Figured out here eventually. Well, you can move that with me to face it later. Anyway, thank you all so much for being part of the Budget Committee. Thank you so much for the time you spend going through this document. And actually, I looked, it's actually 2 pages less than last year for some reason. Instead of 266 pages, it's 264 pages. Maybe save some trees, Eric. Thank you so much. Nice job. But it is a lot of work to go through this, and I always love when somebody like Gene actually catches a 0.1 versus a 0.3 typo in it. That means he actually went through it with a very fine-tooth comb to find those things. So I really appreciate that, because that is a lot of the purpose of the Budget Committee, is to hold the staff accountable and to know that they've looked through it and understand the budget, which is very critical. But a couple comments, and I'm going to spend a lot of time kind of going through what the budget is, what the budget is containing, and some of the new things that are in the budget, so we can talk about them before we get into the Eric show tonight. First of all, as we understand from past work on the Budget Committee, and if you've talked to me before, is that municipal budget law is very unique and it's very different from your home budget and your if you have a personal business budget. If you don't put something in the budget, if you don't account for something as a line item, you can't spend it. Budget law is such that you just have to make sure it's in the budget. I have done multi-million-dollar budgets with a private business and with a nonprofit, and in those budgets, if you decide to spend more than you have on a budget line item, you just do it. You can't. Municipal budget law does not allow you the same flexibility that you have in your personal budgets or your work budgets. So that's the first thing to remember. The second thing is, and this is really important, is that just because you give budget authority, just because you budget for something, does not mean it's going to be spent. The common belief among some people that if you budget something, that government people are going to go crazy in June up to June 30th to spend it so they can spend their budget and justify it for next year is not a attitude, is not a culture in the city of Troutdale. That doesn't exist here. I pay attention to what gets spent in June, and you better have a good reason for it. If you want to justify a budget number, you can't justify it by saying, well, we spent it all last year, so we should get that or more this year. No, I want you to budget for what you want to make sure that we have budgeted for, and if you don't spend it all, that's a good thing, and you're not going to be at risk of losing your budget line item just because you don't spend it from the prior year. We need to look at each budget line item and the reasons that we have it. In all these budgets that we talk about, in terms of, again, if you don't budget for it, you can't spend it, and just because you do a budget allocation does not mean you're going to spend it. And the perfect example of sometimes is why you will see, and I know the chair brings this up every year, and I'm glad that he does, is that you will see deficit budgeting. What you guys are spending more than the income that you're taking in. Well, you know, for your home budgets or your business budget, that would be a problem. Except for the fact is that in practice, the city does not deficit spend. Yes, we deficit budget, but we don't deficit spend. Remember the first rule, if you don't budget it, you can't spend it, and there's a lot of things that we budget for that we don't get to or we don't need. I mean, simple, small things such as we have a staff position all year long that's approved in the budget. They leave in the middle of the year. And, well, it goes vacant for 3 or 4 months. Well, there's a line item that we didn't spend. We have a line item for legal city council. Ed Trumpke, for his billing, we have for the last 2 years in a row a $240,000 line item for city attorney. Last year, 2 years, last 2 years, we've averaged about $100,000 a year. Does that mean you should demand it be cut $100,000 a year? Hopefully not, because we just don't know from year to year what our needs are going to be. His time is based upon lawsuits, problems, issues. Doing a lot of work right now, working with us on the exclusive negotiating agreement with Capstone that we're working through the URA. So there's just a lot of line items like that it probably, if you look at history, is higher than it will be. There's probably 99% chance we'll never spend that $240,000 in a year, but we have it in there so we know it's available just in case something's happened we don't know about. So when you look at that, yes, the budget is deficit spending, but the reality is, and this is why I do this every year, it's always good to remind everybody that we don't deficit spend. In 2019, 2020, the audited financial statement for the City of Troutdale said we had income of $12.7 million in the general fund. We budgeted to spend 13.1, so that would be deficit presumably, but we actually only spent 11.2. So in 2019-20, we actually spent $2 million almost than we budgeted. 2020, 2021, the audited statement said that we had income of $13,400,000. We budgeted to spend $13,700,000. Again, a deficit budget. In reality, we only spent $12.4 million, $1 million less than our income. 2021-22 was the same thing where we, again, spent less than we budgeted, less than our income. That year it was 12.4 of expenditures versus $15 million plus in income. That ending fund balance, it shows you the overall growth. When you look at our ending fund balance in the general fund, in the last 6 years, it has grown from $3 million to $9 million, which means our income has exceeded our expenses over the last 6 years by $6 million. Now, during that time, we've gotten ARPA funds, about $3 million extra from the federal government. We still have a positive growth in our ending fund balance. So just to let you know that I understand why it makes you nervous, that we ask you to deficit budget, but no, we routinely and regularly have always had a positive end of the year report in terms of we don't spend that much. That's the second thing, after talking about how we budget. Second of all, what our end results are. Thirdly, silos. We have to remember that we have, 25, 26, 27 separate budgets within here. And a lot of these budgets are, I like to call them silos, which means is that in our water budget, the only money that goes in there is from the utility rates that we charge our residents and our businesses. The only thing that account can be used for is for our water system. We can't use it to put park benches in our parks. So we have all these funds that are siloed, that the money into them has to get spent for that particular purpose, and we can't pass them between different funds. So it's something to keep in mind that we have all of those siloed accounts. And we always want to make sure that our siloed accounts also have that ending fund balance that's healthy. If you look at overall, I think I'm looking at the overall city funds. If you look in your budget, if you look at the overall city funds, our ending fund balance in 2016 was $15 million. On July 1st of 2022, it had doubled to over $33 million, which means that our ending fund balance from 2016 to now in all citywide funds, all the funds that that we manage, had gone up more than double over that period of time. Again, indicating that our income is always exceeding our expenditures, so that we are showing that we do not negative spend. And finally, the other big area to talk about is contingencies. We talk about this every year, but you will see always in one of the things that leads to that deficit budgeting is that we always take again, I use words that Eric will slap me upside the head if I use, but they're descriptive to me, is that we take the excess money that we have sitting in our accounts that we don't specifically budget for an expense that year, we put it into contingency. So you'll see large contingency budgets of millions and millions of dollars that are in the budget to spend. That's because, again, municipal budget law requires us to budget things or we can't spend it. And we've had this discussion, I know about 2 years ago, we had a very long discussion, Councilor Glantz, Councilor Moon, and several others, we went around and around on this issue is, if we don't put it into contingencies, it's locked away and the council cannot use it generally. It just can't. It can't even vote to use it. And so we put contingency, so if something happens this next year that we didn't anticipate, because we don't have crystal balls, we just set the money into contingency. And the only people that can authorize contingency to be spent is the city council. Staff does not have the power to spend those contingency monies. It's still within the power of elected officials. So that's why you'll see large contingency funds in there. This year, which is unusual for the last couple of years we've done this, there really is, in terms of capital projects, there really is nothing significantly new at all. I mean, every year there's usually some new capital projects that we're talking about, whether it was Dunbar last year, whether it was Imagination Station a couple of years ago, big projects. Almost everything in the capital budget you will see this year, all those capital expenses, are simply carryovers from this year. We just didn't get around to doing them this year. We still need to do them, so there's carryover to next year. So there's not going to be any new big things that are there. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why things are going done. You know, we always know that supply chain issues have hit everybody. We just can't get everything we need to do certain projects. For the first 6-7 months of this year, we didn't have a public works director. We had a chief engineer that was doing both jobs. And so, of course, it cut into his time to do project managing, so we didn't get things done there. So there's a lot of reasons. But in terms of your budget, you're not going to see a lot of new big ticket items that we're doing for next year. The other thing in here, and if you've already read my email to all of you from Jean's questions on Friday night, I'm sorry this is redundant, but I just want to touch on the staff because we are proposing a budget that has 3.25 increase in FTE. And I understand that people get concerned about the growth of government and growth of employees and what's that mean. But I always like to make sure we talk specifically about what the reality is of that growth in FTE. First of all, FTE in terms of a growth over a period of time. I went back again this afternoon and I looked at our FTE in the 2007-2008 budget. When you back out for the police department, we had 57.3 FTE in the city back in 2008. In 2023-24 budget you have in front of you, our FTE is 63.25. An increase of 6 FTE in the last 15 years. So keep that in perspective, what that means in terms of numbers. And during those 15 years, has the city remained the same? Absolutely not. There was no FedEx, Amazon, Troutdale Cubes. None of that existed back in 2008. And that's 5,000 people who are using your sewer, using your water, using your streets every single day, and that puts a burden on your staff. That's been a huge difference in the city. During that 15 years, we've added 700 housing units within this city. All of that increases burdens on staff. So when you look at how many people worked for the city back in 2008, and you look at what we're proposing to work next year, I think it's hard to argue that there's been an unreasonable growth in the amount of staff that we have in our budget. So I think that's important to remember as an overall looking at those increases in FTE. The other thing is to look at the specific 3.25. Number one of them is a new janitor position. That janitor position will be hired as a staff person, and it will replace what we've already been spending every year, about $100,000 for contract janitorial service. When Travis became the public works director, that's something over the years that he thought was a better efficiency for the city, was for us to have an employee who did our janitorial work. And if you look at the budget impact for next year, it's actually adding that 1 FTE will actually save us money, because we will not be spending, I haven't looked at the income numbers, but I can't imagine that for overall cost for a janitor that we're going to be spending any more than the $100,000 we're now spending for contract services. So give or take 5,000 to 10,000 either way, that's pretty much a wash when it comes to budgetary impact, is adding that one FTE. So that's an FTE increase that budget-wise doesn't cost us any more money than it did this year. Second of all, we have the engineering tech that's added. When Travis moved from chief engineer to the public works director, we had a salary spot open for chief engineer, which is paid a heck of a lot more than an engineering tech gets paid. When Travis has been around the city for a very long time, looked at the department heads that he's working with, looked at his duties as chief engineer, and he says, Ray, I believe that I can continue to do the work of the chief engineer in addition to my public works director duties. And I think we're better off as a city if we hire 2 engineering techs to replace the 1 chief engineer we had before. And if you look at the budget and the salary stuff, it works out, again, like the janitor, it's almost a wash in terms of budget impact for next year. One expense is coming in, one expense is going out. So they balance each other out. The other thing that comes in with this, and I'm gonna look at my dear friend, Gene, I keep picking on it, and I'm gonna do it again.
That's because I ask all these questions.
You do. And one of the things that has bothered you from year to year, and of course bothers me, because all our capital projects are important. The reason they're in the budget is they're important. And the reason I said a lot of them are carrying over to next year is that every one of those projects needs a project manager. We need to have some staff person who can shepherd the general contractor, generally watch over that project and make sure it's done correctly for the citizens of Troutdale. By adding an extra engineering tech in that department, it gives us greater capacity to oversee more projects so we can get more projects done and get them off our list, hopefully, than we have in the past. That's one of the benefits of taking Travis's chief engineering position and cutting it into 2 40-hour positions so that they can get more projects done, hopefully, during next year and not have a huge budgetary impact. The other important thing to remember about the janitorial position and the engineering tech position, those are primarily not general fund positions. Those come out of the enterprise, the siloed funds, and so they are supported by income from other revenues other than our general fund revenues. So that's 1, 2. The third FTE increase is going to be for a maintenance person in our internal services division. Generally, within the city of Troutdale, we have very complicated systems. We've got a sewage treatment plant that takes your poo and allows us to flush it into the Sandy River. It's amazingly complex systems of electronics and systems that make it work. You have a water system that has, what do we actually have? 5 pumps that contribute to the water system on a daily basis. There are huge pumps taking huge power to huge different reservoirs that goes everywhere. We have vehicles, we have lawnmowers. All those things have to be maintained and taken care of. And we have 2 people on staff that generally take care of all the systems within the city. This is an additional internal services division person. The first reason, and the reason I advocate for it, is that it's called succession planning. The 2 people that cover all the maintenance of every system in this city, one of them is 70 years old and has been working for the city for 40 years. If you want to know where the skeletons are buried for all of our internal departments around here in terms of every equipment we have, it goes with them. They will not be here much longer, and their wisdom and their experience will go with them. The second person in that department is in his 50s. Wonderful. I don't assume he's leaving anytime soon, but he is getting toward the end of, as I put in the email to you all, end of his service life also. So what we're looking to is to hire somebody now who can learn from these 2 people over the next couple of years, so that when we lose the 70-year-old, which can happen anytime in the next year or 2, when we lose the other person in the next 5 years, we have already had somebody trained on board to be able to step into those positions and not be going, how do you fix this? How do you fix that? Where does this lie? So that's one of the reasons we're hiring that person. The second reason is, and this is the one Travis likes to advocate for, is that everything in the city's got more complicated. All of our systems at the wastewater plant, at the water treatment system, that we have increased number of vehicles, everything is more complicated, everything is more involved. We have more things to take care of, maintain than we ever did before. And having that extra person is going to help us keep our systems running better, which hopefully will reduce costs in the long run, because we'll have less breakage, which always costs more money. So that's the third position, and why we're advocating for the increase to add that 1 extra internal services division. And finally, and it's not a big number, but it's the 0.25. Kevin Mooney, your electronic media specialist who handles all of our websites and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that electronic media. His responsibilities have grown a lot. We currently, in the last year and a half, we have added 2 new websites to the city and things that he oversees and takes care of. We've added the Confluence website, which has got a ton of material if you haven't been on it. We also have now, because we took over tourism 2 years ago, we have a tourism website that he helps work with. He also, as I explained to Councilor White earlier when we met, Kevin also does things like the council contributed $5,000 to the Mount Hood Festival of Jazz. Well, they said, oh, by the way, you get a full page in our program. Kevin's the one who designed our full page ad. He does things like that for us. And so Kevin has just found with his workload to keep up with all the things he's asked to do, to keep all those systems running, is to increase his time from 30 to 40 hours a week. So that's the 0.25 for Kevin. So, overall, when I look at historically what our FTEs have been, what we're at right now, based on all the changes in the city over the years, it is not an unreasonable amount that we have in terms of FTE. And second of all, if you look at the budgetary impact of this increase in FTE, technically, it's really only about a 1 to 1.5 FTE increase when it comes to budgetary impact. And what I forgot to mention also, that I did in the letter to y'all on Friday evening is that yes, you will see in the budget a full contract janitorial service budget, and you will see a full janitor and personnel budget. That does not mean next year we are going to pay for the contract janitor and the staff janitor at the same time. There is a transition that has to occur. I don't know when we can hire an in-house janitor. It may be July 1st, it may be January 1st. I don't know. Maybe we don't hire one next year. Maybe we don't find the right person to fill that role and we don't hire one. In the meantime, we still have janitorial service needs in the city. So it's going to be one of those things where one gets drawn down as the other one is going to be picking up. So that's why you'll see 2 in there. Again, there's a lot of budget line items like that will at the end of the year allow us, as we've always told you, to spend less than we budget. And that's just one of the reasons that happens, is because we have to keep both in there because we just don't know what the next year will hold in terms of hiring that new employee. So when we go through the budget, those are the big things, the big differences we're going to see. And, overall, one of the things to remember is the overall health of the budget within the city of Troutdale. You will probably find not any more conservative city manager or finance director than you have in the city in terms of people who worry about making sure that we don't overspend and we have margin in our budget. This year's budget, I believe, Eric, we're starting with is it an $8 million or $9 million ending fund balance?
Yes.
Yes. Eric will tell me if I'm wrong. He's been here for about 15 years. That's the largest ending fund balance ever in the history of the city of Troutdale. We have a healthy fund balance. We obviously don't, you can say, well, you should spend more money. Well, we don't want to spend money unless we really have to. Last year, when you allowed us to hire a new person in streets, that was one of those things that we kind of had to do at free staff because we'd already asked the citizens to give us $1 million ultimately a year in gas tax. We need to hire somebody to make our roads better, so we had to increase staff. So we are building our funds up, but we're also looking to get some great projects done next year. The skate park, the dog park, getting Dunbar done. All those large capital projects hopefully will get done next year. And overall, we'll eat into that ending fund balance, but those are conscious decisions that you all make. So I ramble on, I keep going here, because I say all this because I know this is a hugely important decision for all of you to be involved in, is what the city's budget is for next year. And I say all that to hopefully understand the reasons why we're doing what we're doing in the budget, and to show you that the budget has been well managed for years. And as they always tell you, past performance is the best indicator of future performance. And we will continue to take care of the city finances in a way that is integrous and is conservative in a way that we don't have any crises. But as we know, the future, we don't know what the market's going to do. We don't know what the economy's going to do. We don't know what international politics are going to do. We always like to have a good cushion in all of our funds in case all heck breaks loose down the road. And that's a good insurance against that. So my rambling is done. Thank you, Chair, and I will hand it back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Young. Appreciate that. I'd just like to say it's an honor for me to serve you this year as your Budget Committee Chair. We're doing a hybrid meeting again this year, and if you're online, please use the raise hand feature, and I'll get to you as quickly as possible. And if you're in chambers, please raise your hand. And if I don't see you right away, I apologize. You can throw something over at me or do something until I see you and call on you. You know, as there's a lot of members on this committee, and these proceedings are recorded, not televised, we need to call on you to make sure that we've got integrity with our meeting recording and minutes and things going forward. We'll want to save this for posterity, you know. Just keep it. I want to thank the department heads, and particularly Eric and Ray, for all the work they've done to put this budget together, and especially thank you guys. I don't know about you, but the eyes start going cross-eyed after a while, and everything starts looking the same. You got to put it down and go beat something up and then come back and look at it again. But it's a lot to go through, and I know how long it takes, how much work. Really appreciate it. You know, this committee, though, I got to tell you, gets a really tough rap. Because if you ask a lot of questions, you're really not trusting in the process of our very valuable staff. And if you don't ask a lot of questions, you get accused of rubber stamping the budget and not really caring what anybody thinks. And I have heard from a number of you, and I know that I serve you and represent you and try to balance your needs with the needs of everyone in the room and everyone online, not to mention the entire staff and the 17,000 citizens that we represent. We do know that current staff never spends more than we budget, and doesn't even spend the amount that we do budget. Will that change? I just have to say this because I got this used on me next. What about the next guy? What happens when somebody else comes in? What's their philosophy? And I think we've all seen that in our lives at different times, but not to say that that's going to happen here, but it is something you need to think about, because when the budget committee signs off on the budget, they're saying, yes, staff, yes, council, we're good with what's in here. And there's no other decisions or actions that the budget committee takes or gets any updates from that. But you know, you look at it, at the end of the day, we're going to be judged on the services that we provide the citizens and the fiscal responsibility with which we do that. You know, you look at it, is this a big budget? Yeah. 6.6 million deficit. I don't know, but I think that's probably close to a record. And I went back and looked at some FTE things myself, and I could only go back to 2010, 11. But you look at it, have we increased staff and changed over that time? Yeah, we have. But I look at, like, if I look at what the general fund's done the last 3 years, right? We've raised our revenue $1,056,000, which is great, but our entire staff costs, personnel costs, has gone up $1.669 million. And I think these are just things that we all have to look at. And you know, people always say, wow, was that in the budget? Well, yeah, it was. And it's our job to know what's in the budget. So if somebody asks you after the meeting, you know, if you voted for it and it's in the budget, you should know the answer to that. Because people are always asking, you know, what is it we do and how do we do it and how does it fit within the city? We have a responsibility to everybody here to do the best job that we can. And I don't know the answer of what's a good deficit and what's not a good deficit. That's up to all of us to decide. But we do know that we need to have some money left at the end of the day. And the more we spend, the less we're going to have, because our income's only going up so far. We know that there's pretty much caps put on that. So we've got to be effective with what we do. The other thing that I do want to say along with this is, I think that sometimes, my own opinion, we're shirking our responsibility to the city and to the citizens and to staff. We put things in here and we're like, okay, you guys manage it. Or we tell the council to manage it. And we say, you guys figure out what projects to do. I really think that if it's something like hiring somebody or doing a project, I think we need to take a little bit more ownership in that. We need to say, you know what, we don't want to do that this year because we don't think it's the right time. And I don't want to be handcuffing anybody, but I think it's our responsibility to be able to say, this is why this isn't getting done, because we decided that. Don't make staff have to answer for it, or council have to answer for it. We need to answer for it. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to be here for however many meetings this is, because it doesn't matter how many meetings it is, it matters what we get done at the end of the day. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric Mueller, Mr. Finance Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll see if I can't get this to launch. Okay, a few slides in, but tonight, overview, we've got to cover a number of the regulatory requirements. Hopefully folks can hear me online. I already put them to sleep, okay, well, that's fine. Regulatory requirements, we'll touch on the local budget law requirements, the budget message. We need to ensure that we accomplish public comment on the budget so that we stay in compliance. So we've published and made that an obligation for tonight, as well as public comment on state shared revenues. Come on, there we go. And then we've got to do a number of the same things as the Urban Renewal Agency. You'll take your hat off as city budget members and put your URA budget committee member hats on, and we'll do the budget message there and the public comment. So that's the overview of what we're headed toward this evening. Let me get to the right, go there. So we have, oops, come on. Sorry, that's somehow this seemed easier in the pre-Zoom era. Okay, the annual quick review of budget committee responsibilities. So based on the local budget law is why we do it the way we do it, what's the process. The budget is proposed, it's prepared by management. The local budget law expects that your day-to-day management staff is responsible for putting together a proposal to deliver the services that the council and the citizens expect. So that's what this tome that you've received is intended to be provided. It's submitted to you as a budget committee. The budget committee is not a city creation, but rather a requirement from the state legislature and the statute that requires a budget committee and requires the composition to be an equal number of the elected officials and citizen members. Budget committee considers things, they make changes if they believe it's appropriate, and they certainly have the ability to do that at high level, at detailed level, whatever that they may choose to do. They then approve the budget, and that approved budget then has to be reworked, published in a specific form in the newspaper, a certain number of days, et cetera, and that approved budget eventually goes before the city council, for which then they will adopt a budget, which they need to do prior to July 1st, otherwise we go tilt, can't operate, but in any case, those things happen in June. So the practical goal of the budget committee is to produce approved budget. More staff is in tune with council and community priorities. Hopefully that is well reflected in the budget. The more out of tune they are, the more changes need to be. So again, why we do it this way, local budget law goes on and on. I think I've provided all of you on the committee this booklet. Anybody that hasn't gotten one, I'll give it to you as well, but it provides a good overview of the And it's written specifically for budget committee members, but they talk about that sort of there's 9 major categories or steps. Budget committee is smack dab in the middle of it. We've got a number of things we have to do before we get to this night, and we can't proceed to the end unless the budget committee is able to do its duties. So they're right in the middle. They meet and they approve the budget. This is the overall process. I think in the previous edition, they referred to it as the simplified process, which always cracked me up. But in any case, again, these are the steps. Budget committee's right in the middle of it in order for us to get to the end. So budget committee is a critical role. It's integral part of the process. Budget committee does not rubber stamp. They look and see, does it reflect what the community priorities are? And the stuff in the proposed budget doesn't get changed. And that is not a reflection that that you're not paying attention. You know, I've touched on this every year, 6-hour class on local budget law. Again, they talk about what the purposes are from the Department of Revenue. It's to establish standard procedures, outline the programs and fiscal policies, requires estimates of both the revenue or the resources side as well as the uses or expenditure side. It's specifically designed to encourage citizen involvement. It's why the statute is structured such that there are citizens involved in the budget committee. It isn't just staff and the city council. And of course, the intent is to control expenditure of public funds. So 4 phases: propose, approve, adopt, and then the changes after the budget is throughout the course of the year. So phase 1 is proposing the budget. Again, it's a plan. It's for 1 fiscal year. It's estimates, not going to be, it's always going to be different. The budget is the basis to create the authority or the authorization to spend. Again, not an obligation to spend, but an allowance to do so. Budget committee in phase 2, again, equal number of governing body and appointed. Each member has an equal weight vote in the budget committee. Budget committee does require a majority of the committee, not a majority of those who show up, but a majority of the committee to pass business, to pass a budget, to pass the tax levies. It's an important distinction that sometimes can create a committee's duties are to receive the budget document, which you've done already, hear the budget message, which you'll hear shortly, hear and consider public comment for any input from the citizens as you consider how things are allocated. Citizens over the years at different times have come and advocated for different priorities. Discuss and revise the budget as needed, approve the budget, and then statutorily, the budget committee must approve the property tax levies before it can go to the city council. So those are the statutory duties. Budget message is a required item. It's prepared, it explains the budget document, financial conditions, changes since last year, it's got to be in writing. Anyone can deliver it, so you're stuck with me. All the budget committee's meetings are public meetings, which is why we stress to you when we send out the packet not to huddle together with your fellow committee members and talk about it, because it needs to be a public meeting process as required. Quorum required to conduct business, required the majority to take action, etc. Public comment requires a publication in the newspaper, which we've done, and to ensure that the public has the opportunity to speak this evening on the budget. Motion to approve the budget, motion to approve the tax levies. Once that is done, the committee's work for that budget cycle has been completed. Now, the budget process is not done, but the budget committee's role has been completed. So adopting the budget, resolutions and so forth go to the city council. They adopt the budget, make appropriations, impose the tax levies, categorize the tax levies for the county assessor. Changes after adoption, this is for the current fiscal year. City council is the one that has the ability to make those changes. Some require greater degree of publication in advance in the newspaper than others. Anyway, that's, and then, you know, as I mentioned, there's a whole local budget manual, 112 pages if you just have insomnia. Goes through all kinds of categories related to the preparation of the budget. Again, it's geared toward the staff. So what's What's missing? Well, those are the steps. Again, the budget committee is key. It's right in the middle of the process. And these are all the many slides that are in that 6-hour training class that I'm not going to drag you through. So again, your duties: receive the budget message, consider public comment, revise if needed, approve the budget, and approve the property taxes. So critical role, part of the process, not a rubber stamp, evaluates it's reasonable, what's proposed, it matches community priorities, considers public comment. So any questions on statutory and the budget committee's annual training that we've now checked the box on?
Eric, I got one question in regards to comments by Ray and the comments in your slides. It sounds like the budget can be changed once the budget is approved. In Ray's opening comments, as last year, we cannot do any projects unless they are in the budget. Cannot projects be added to the budget and the budget changed after it's been approved? So it's not necessarily that.
Ray's mouth is full, so it gives me a chance to answer for him. But we have to have appropriation authority in the budget. If we've got $100,000 in a capital project in a particular department, and that capital project is not going to happen, it could be used for a different capital project, but it's got to stay in that very tight silo. If there is a new item that comes up that staff believes needs to be addressed before the next budget cycle, staff can go to the city council and say, we want to move money from contingency into the capital projects bucket to be able to pursue this new project that came up sooner than we had planned. We were going to, it's in the capital improvement plan, but we were going to do it 3 years from now, but the contractor's doing this, it's the right opportunity. So there is some degree of ability to change things, but it's also going to be limited based on what resources are available and what amount of money may be in contingency or not. So
So theoretically, we could take something out of this year's budget and add it back in later.
a specific project.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, several years ago, we had a ping pong scenario over the dog park. It was in, and then it was taken out, and then it was put back in by the city council. That type of thing can happen. Usually it doesn't.
Looking for clarity.
Yeah, the other thing to finish that, now that my mouth is not flowing longer, is contingency. If you don't have the money in your contingency account, you just left it and not in a contingency, you can't reach that money though correctly. Did you take that, Eric, is that correct? That if there's not money in contingency to cover a particular new item next year or something, you can't spend any money if you didn't put it into the contingency budget.
Yeah, the critical difference is there is a category that's referred to as the ending fund, unappropriated ending fund balance. That money is locked up for 12 months. The only provision that it can be accessed is under the conditions of a natural disaster, which at that point nobody really cares about whether you're following the, but under budget law, that's the only way that can be accessed. So if you have money, quote, as Ray terms it, excess fund, that's sitting in the unappropriated ending fund balance, it's locked up until you go through the next budget process. If it's sitting in contingency, staff can't touch it, but city council can. And that is an issue for some people because they don't trust 4 city councilors. So it becomes that's a whole different issue, but that's why contingency and ending fund appropriated balance are important distinctions.
Mr. Allen.
Yeah, Mr. Mueller, isn't there a limit to what council can vote on as far as a change to the budget outside of what you've already mentioned, like 15% or something like that?
Well, there's 2 different stages between the time the budget committee approves a budget and adoption in June for that coming July. There's limitations on what the city council can change. City council can't touch anything related to the tax levies. Those have to go back to the budget committee if they want them changed. I have to look it up to know what exactly the percentages are, but there's limitations in terms of how much the city council can increase expenditures.
Right, that's what I'm
From
referring
what the
to.
budget committee has approved. There's no limit on what the city council can reduce expenditures. So, you know, if we put in $4 million, you know, for the Gene Bent Memorial Water Park, and the budget committee approves it, the city council could decide to shave that back to $2 million.
Right.
But they couldn't decide to raise it to $5 million.
Right, they have to be limited within that percentage.
After the budget's adopted, once you're in the, like, for the budget that we're in right now, for the current fiscal year, there's other limitations in terms of what can be transferred and what different levels of documentation and public notice that are required. At lower thresholds, it's simply a resolution and ordinary item on a normal city council agenda. If it's above a certain threshold, then it requires an advanced publication in the newspaper and a supplemental budget process and just a bit more notice.
Right.
But it's still then dealt with at a city council meeting and, you know, public meeting, et cetera. So it sort of depends on when, timing-wise, those changes might be considered.
Thanks, perfect. I was just looking to specify that there are some limits. Sorry to see you approaching.
Still 2 million.
Memorial Park.
So, good with questions, ready to move on to budget message, Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry. Counselor Glantz?
Thanks. Yeah, I had a quick question. I think I ask you this every year. My apologies. It's like I, spend 2 weeks going through this and then I think I sleep it off or something. But when we talk about increasing the property tax levy, how do we know what percent comes from property taxes versus other sources? Is property taxes what we look to make up any budget difference in order to set that amount, that percent?
I guess I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're asking. The property tax levies, there's two that we adopt as a city. One is what's referred to as the permanent rate, and that's established, went back when Measure 5 was passed. It's fixed, it doesn't change, and so that's the 3.76252, well, anyway, per thousand, and that's the rate that's fixed. In theory, the city council could say, no, we don't want all that money, we'll only levy $2 a thousand. Not likely, but in theory, they could do that. They can't increase above that level. The other property tax levy that the budget committee has to approve and ultimately the council is for the general obligation bonds, because it's a separate property tax levy that the voters have specifically approved to say, yes, we'll pay for this capital project. We've had two in the past. We paid off the first one, which was for the sewer treatment plant when it was built. And then the second one is for the remaining one that we currently have is for the police facility. And we just did the refunding and lowered the interest costs, et cetera, just in the nick of time, thankfully. But that's the second property tax levy that we do. And that's based on, a combination of what's necessary to fund the repayment of the bond in the coming fiscal year. And that's based on the payment schedule. The very last couple of pages of your budget book has got all the debt schedules in it of what we have to collect for each of those debt obligations.
All right, nope, that answers my question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. Good work. There we go. Okay, budget message. There we go. Management's proposed budget, the economic outlook, general economy, gross domestic product. Of course, we had the big drawdown in 2020, snap back in 2021. 2022 is coming back more to trend. 2021 is 2023 is trending downward from there. Conference board forecast thinks we're gonna, growth is gonna slow to 0.7 to 0.8, looking for recession mid-2023 outlook based on the persistent inflation. Leading indicators, are both significantly trending downward trend on them, forecasting the continued slowdown and contraction in the general economy. Housing. A year ago on the left side, I had reported, a 1 year 17.2% increase. Well, that was from the 2 years ago to last year. This year, from last year to now, is a 1.5% decline. And that part of that is combination of, okay, that was a big increase, so there's some moderation in it. But it's also driven by that chart where you've had significant rise in mortgage interest rates that are certainly impacting housing and housing activity. It's also going to tend to, I believe, continue to slow the housing market over the course of the year, because you've got a number of people that would have chosen to trade up. They would have to pay for a bigger house, but now they're going to pay for a bigger house, which is a bigger payment, but also at a higher interest rate, which also makes it unaffordable. As well as they currently have a 3.5% mortgage, and they don't really want to give up their 3.5% mortgage for a 6.25% mortgage. So they're more likely to stay put. So the housing market over the course of the next 18 months is going to be pretty sluggish. Probably see a continued trend downward in values. We're not going to see the dramatic drop that we saw in the 2008 financial crisis days, because that was driven by a lot of bad mortgage underwriting. This is more interest rate impact. So again, Zillow home price down minor 1.5% over the course of the year. So consumer confidence and expectations, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. At the moment, they're saying it's not really so bad, but I expect it to get worse. It's kind of how the two lines are diverging. Has an impact on what consumer spending will be, has an impact on then what economic activity will be for business, since consumers drive such a huge portion of it. Consumer sentiments, the labor market is positive. It does reflect concerns over the next 6 months. They still feel positive on the job front, because I think jobs have gone from having 1.9 jobs available for every job seeker to down to 1.7 jobs for every job seeker. There's still a tremendous over demand for labor that's available. And again, the sanctions have ticked up 6.6, 6.8 for the next 12 months. Again, reflecting their expectations. Unemployment rate, of course, we saw the gigantic spike with the COVID shutdown, and then of course it's been coming down ever since. We're bouncing around the 3.4 to about 3.7 range month to month, and part of that depends on whether we have people come back into the labor force, impacts some of the participation rate, some of the volume, but job openings and hirings continue to be strong. We're based on the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. I always try and steal stuff from them for the presentations. We're back, recovered fully from to the point from prior to the big drop down for COVID. This sort of is a different graphic of showing where the different areas of growth since the drop down. This is particularly related to the Portland metro area. We're still down in the leisure and hospitality section versus pre-COVID, which is not surprising. Restaurant and as well as kind of hotel, some theater kind of activities. So inflation, Western region consumer price index, which is largely the index used for a lot of the contracts that the city's involved with, labor contract, leases and other, for covers West Coast, the Class A cities. But in any case, we've seen a dramatically higher inflation level over the last 2 years in particular. It's starting to come down, but it's being stubborn about how quickly it's coming down. It's having the right trend, it's just not moving down as quickly as it moved up. So a CPI change year over year, you can see we had the big peak and it's continuing to come down, but it's still taking its time. This is just the overall components, and in any given month, you have some going up, some going down, which creates, of course, the net cross current of what happens. We may still have egg prices going up, but if gasoline drops from $5.50 a gallon to $5 a gallon, it's going down, and it has different impacts on different households. So inflation trend, slowly downward trend, continuing shift from goods to services as more and more service is able to be staffed. It's somewhat limited by the labor constraint. Supply chains have largely recovered. They're still running pretty much full tilt, so they don't really have much in the way of cushion if there's another ripple, but they've largely recovered, not 100%, and so we continue to have a lot of cost push and demand pull inflation. So on the horizon, recession. Recession's essentially how they're judged and categorized. There's essentially 3 Ds that they consider: depth, diffusion, and duration. The depth was, of course, dramatic for COVID. It was one of the largest in history in terms of the economic downturn over the course of April of 20. The diffusion gets at what sectors of the economy are impacted. Is it a recession that's just limited to commercial real estate, or is it hit all areas of the economy? Certainly the COVID recession did that. The duration was what was unique about the COVID one. Almost 60 days, it started to recover. It's one of the deepest, but one of the shortest recessions ever on record. So going into this next recession, we don't expect it to be anywhere near kind of depth. Predicting basically a mild recession. Certainly nothing like what COVID created. And certainly we don't have the financial conditions that we had in 2008. We're not going to have that kind of a financial markets and banking type of financial impact. It's going to tend to be a milder recession. Part of the challenge that the Federal Reserve is dealing with, trying to create that demand destruction, is the labor component is still so strong. They're having a hard time getting that demand to come down. So really the expectation is that they are going to continue to raise rates despite what all the Wall Street talking heads continue to advocate for. And it's likely that once they get them up, they're going to stay at that level for quite a while longer than what Wall Street's expecting before they do their magical pivot and start to cut rates. I think we're going to be well into next calendar year before we see that. They're already forecasting that we're going to come through that recession. It's going to be rather mild, comparatively speaking, and going to be from beginning to full recovery 24 months. So economic summary: recession likely coming late this year into 2024 due to the Federal Reserve's continuing tightening. Inflation is slowing. Costs are going to remain elevated. So if gasoline went to $5.50 and it's now dropped to $5, well, okay, it's gone down, but it's not down to $2.50 a gallon like it was 3 years ago. The price level is staying elevated, but the inflation is not continuing to occur. We're going to continue to be at elevated cost levels. Supply chains largely recovering. Labor market is what's continuing to constrain the economy. And again, the biggest risk remains the persistently high inflation. So questions on the economic outlook? I guess I should, so that you could see if there's anybody.
Councilor Glantz.
Yes, thank you. I have a quick question, Eric. Thank you for that. When COVID hit, you had a great explanation about why why the recovery was so different, and you called it, I believe, the K recovery, where you had people with, who could work from home and did just fine. And then you had a lot of people who were out of work and hit that bottom part of the K. And the reason I'm asking what you think Troutdale, where it currently sits, is I'm kind of wondering, from your professional viewpoint, where do you see Troutdale in terms of, if we increase costs on things like water and sewer, does that change someone's life, or is it an inconvenience to most members of Troutdale?
Well, Troutdale has, of course, a diverse community. Generally, it's a more affluent community than other geographically similar sizes in Multnomah County, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the city is affluent. So I think it's going to vary from household to household, what impact cost increases have. So I can't give you a single answer.
I'm just, I guess, looking for a distribution, 50-50, 20% are impacted, 80%. It adds to the budget, but doesn't change their life.
Without going and doing some research, I don't know that I can speculate on a percentage. I tend to think it's probably a 25% or less segment, but that's just
It's
sort
not
of
50-50. Yeah, just looking for
over 30 seconds of contemplation.
Okay, thank you.
You have questions?
Okay, continue. Okay. Come on. Okay, so the proposed budget. So citywide, all funds, 78 million versus 70 million last year. Again, that's across all of Ray's silos added together. That's one of the very early pages that's summarized in your budget. Materials and services at 15 million, $500,000 increase over the prior year. Public works funds, capital improvement funds, debt service funds, and the general fund. There's a whole range of funds that comprise that overall total. Public works funds, the operating funds, in the accounting or local budget law world, they're referred to as enterprise funds. The budget law expectation is that they are supposed to operate in a manner in which their costs are recovered by their user fees. That's the intended design and expectation. So the utility budget, what's proposed in the budget, includes an 8.5% rate increase, which is 43 cents per thousand, increases it from 507 to 550. The sewer fund, again, same 8.5% increase, $4.23 per ERU, equivalent residential unit, going from 49 to 53. Stormwater, again, same 8.5, 21 cents from 292 to 313 for the increase in thousands feet of impervious surface area. So the estimated impact on the average Troutdale household, and we use sort of a single family resident generic because of course, there's a lot of them, but that's not every single household. It's about $7.98 a month or $65.76 a year. Again, these rate increases are necessary for the increased cost. As we saw in the previous slides, inflation has been significant over the last 24 months. Coming this July 1st, it will have been 24 months since there was a utility rate increase. So there's been none for the last 2 years. So Bureau of Labor Statistics, the CPI, Western Consumers, Class A, et cetera, that CPI change between July 1st, our last rate increase, and December 22 was 8.54%. That was the number we settled on in terms of proposing an increase, because of course we don't know what exactly it's going to be by this June 30th, the end of this fiscal year, and we have to do the budgets in January. So that was a way that we came up with a reasonable basis as a increase. Because of course I've gotten the question, well, why 8.5? Why not 6.2 or 9.1 or 8 point whatever? That was the reasonable basis. Again, this is based on the inflation that's occurred for that 18-month period. Again, July 23 will be the 24 months since the last utility rate increase. For context, there's always the question, and somewhat may get to some of what Sandy was asking about, people that are on Social Security. Well, their utility rates are going to go up. Well, for 2022, there was a benefit COLA increase of 5.9 and then 8.7 for this year, represents an average monthly revenue increase for those households of $262. We're looking for $8 of that monthly increase as what we're proposing for the utility rates, to provide some context. So improvement funds are on the SDC funded side, capital projects to improve our infrastructure systems. Again, going back to the silos, we can't use improvement funds in the water improvement fund on stormwater projects and vice versa. That's why we have so many separate segregated funds, and developers pay into these funds based on those infrastructure different categories, and we have to keep them segregated. All of the SDC funds kind of have a pair. There's an improvement fund and then there's a reimbursement fund. Again, you can't use water reimbursement money over on storm or street or whatever. They have to be used related to their infrastructure system. Other public works funds, there's the internal services fund, some of which Ray talked about in the opening remarks. There's kind of two divisions within that. There's the equipment maintenance division, folks that take care of all of the vehicles and equipment in the city, as well as all of the infrastructure, pumps and electronics and mechanicals. And then there's also the public works management side, which also has all the engineering, project management, GIS, et cetera. Both of those divisions are within that. Other public works funds, we put it kind of under that category, the utilities undergrounding fund, where we accumulate that privilege tax that is paid by all Troutdale residents on their electric bill. It goes into that fund, and again, it's restricted. It can only be used for undergrounding projects. Bike and trail path, it's funded by 1% from the state gas tax mandates that 1% is segregated. Street tree fund. Parks department is a division in the general fund managed by the public works team, as well as the solid waste recycling. And then the parks improvement fund is an SDC fund that is similar, but I mean it's an infrastructure fund in that it's for parks, but it is pipes and pumps, but nevertheless, it's a separate segregated fund. It's also been our internal piggy bank that we have used as our place to go borrow from, and have had multiple loans from over the years that we borrow from and pay back. Code Specialties Fund is where all the building inspection, permitting activities are. Again, the state statutes require those things to be run separately by those trade divisions, the building, electrical, and plumbing, and it's to be separate and distinct, operating similar to a enterprise fund. Sam Cox Building Maintenance Fund was something the council established about 12 years ago, related to the Sam Cox facilities. There's debt service funds, and then actually I should delete that last line item because we finally, that's one of the reasons why the pages are shorter. We finally fulfilled the Police Facility Capital Projects Fund. We have to keep it in the budget for 3 years after it was last used, and last year was the last time, so I got to take those pages out. That's why we were 2 pages less this year. So, but I forgot to take it off the slide. Capital outlay. So proposed budget on the capital outlay, we've got $11,149,000. General fund includes the, proposed capital outlay, the 1,708,000. A lot of the projects Ray has already mentioned, carryovers from the current year's budget that we made some progress on. But it's on page 18 in your budget. There's a whole listing of them. And then the remaining capital projects funds are related to all of those public works funds that we talked about. There's some capital in the operating funds, but then all of those SDC funds, they are capital project funds by definition. So all of their costs, et cetera, and that's also on that same listing from 18 through 21. On the debt service side, we have, as I was talking earlier, we have the general obligation bond. Technically, they're refunding bonds since the council approved the refunding process that we went through last July. And they're paid from the debt service fund from a separate property tax levy that the voters agreed to pay toward. 521,000. We have 9 years remaining on this new series. We allocate 175,000 in the budget, as we have since 2015, from the general fund into the debt service fund toward the payment of the police facility bonds related to the release revenue from the lease of this facility. Very last 3 pages of the budget book has got all the schedules for the debt. The full faith and credit bonds. This is one of the big items that I mentioned in the budget cover memo that's coming, that we're dealing with in this coming year, but its original 2018 was when we acquired it. 10 years term, first year was interest only. We're coming up on the first year of the $1 million principal payments that are required. And it has no separate revenue source. It's not a general obligation bond. There isn't a separate levy that the citizens pay toward. We have from the beginning, and we're proposing again this year to continue to allocate this coming fiscal year, and which is also the final year of the Amazon Community Service Fee, toward that debt service fund. And then the budget proposes to pay off that $5 million, as well as the interest that accumulates between now and that payoff date. Pay off those pay off those full faith and credit bonds in their entirety. That's what's proposed in this year's budget. That does a couple of things for us. It removes one of the challenges potentially on the real estate transaction with a future developer, because based on the statutes related to full faith and credit and the Oregon Constitution, we have a limitation that the real estate can't be transferred to a private party with that debt outstanding, because it's considered a lending of credit, which violates the Oregon Constitution. So we need to pay it off in order for that potential deal to happen. We have been accumulating funds intentionally in the debt service fund toward this eventuality. We've been accumulating the funds. If we had sold the property and the developer was buying it, a year ago, well, we would have had to deal with it then, but we're not there. But once we collect this November, early December's payment from Amazon, that transfer into the debt service fund, we would then pay off the $5 million in principal, the interest. That would eliminate that debt and eliminates that obstacle for potential transfer of that property that's in the URA. It eliminates the external debt that the city took on and the external debt holders. It doesn't change the debt obligation between the URA and the city, which is a different animal, which we'll get to a little bit later with the URA budget.
Eric, if I just add one little asterisk to that, since Ray is a glass half full time kind of guy, there's 2 nice things here. Is that all of you have been wonderful to support putting that Amazon payment into the debt service fund, so it skipped past the general fund and kind of was hidden away in the savings account to pay off that property, which is a great ability the city has now to do that. But second of all, starting the next budget year, that $950,000 will be in our check from Multnomah County when we get our regular property tax payment. So in addition to the normal 3% increase you get because of property values, we will have almost $1 million extra in property tax revenues in the 24-25 budget year, which will be a nice little, boost to the general fund revenue that year. So, anyway,
Nice. And I would only say, we hope.
we hope, yeah. Hopefully Jeff Bezos keeps it open.
Counselor White.
We hope Multnomah County sends it to us.
Oh, that's true.
And the assessor views the assessed value similarly and all those kinds of things. But it certainly is expected to be in that magnitude.
It's kind of a moot point, but I'm just curious, wouldn't it have been better as that community service money came in that we paid down the loan to reduce the interest cost, or is there a reason we didn't do that?
I think when we originally entered into it, the expectation or the hope, I guess I should say, was that we were going to clean up the property and we were going to hope to sell the property and, get a check for $9 million for the real estate, before the first thing due.
Yeah.
That was, sort of the original best hope, desired plan, or whatever. And of course, that things didn't work out that way. But we're also, thankfully, we've accumulated this money, as Ray refers to it, in the savings account. So we're not all of a sudden faced with, okay, you have a new $1 million expenditure next year that you didn't have in your plans. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Eric, in addition to that, you're also getting some interest on that money that you've been saving.
in terms of it being in the local government investment pool, that's true. It hasn't been, but since the last maybe year or so that it's been particularly helpful, given what banks are paying for deposits. But absolutely, that whatever interest was earned on that balance did go into that fund. It didn't go elsewhere into one of the other silos. So
It just helped offset some of the extra, quote unquote, as Glenn was saying, we're paying it off earlier in steps to save on interest. At least you're getting, or on paying interest, you're getting some of that back in interest.
Yeah, I know we got a good rate on that loan being a government rate.
yeah, unfortunately, we took it out in 2018 and borrowing costs were dramatically lower than they are today. I mean, that chart that showed the mortgage interest, chart, I mean, it's not those rates, but they parallel,
Sure.
on the scale, and so dramatically lower. The other full faith and credit obligation we've got is the loan from the Oregon Brownfields Redevelopment Fund, which is funded by the legislature, administered by Business Oregon. The city borrowed that $1.5 million. It also has a 10-year term. It has a staggered payment structure of, no payments for a year, interest only for a year, and then we started doing principal and interest payments. Again, it's also something that there's no separate revenue source for, so it's simply something that the general fund has been making the payments for. It's about $13,000 a month is what it currently runs us. At the moment, I'm just going to continue to make those payments. If we get to striking a deal, then I'm going to approach Business Oregon. Of course, I'm going to pitch them that now you've invested in this redevelopment. There's this beautiful new facility that's going to be built that you help provide the funding for. Would you like to just forgive the rest of the balance? Which we'll see whether we can get them to bite on it. I sort of doubt it because they've already forgiven $60,000 of the original balance. They did that as part of their support for the redevelopment. So we actually are only having to pay back a $1,440,000 of the original principal. But the other part that when they might demur on that pitch is that will they allow us to continue to make the payments and allow us to sell the real estate? Because the way the loan is currently written, they may allow that, but they're not obligated to allow that. So if we get to the point where we have to do the transaction with capstone and the state isn't gonna allow that to happen without paying off the loan, then we'll have to maneuver to figure out how do we pay off whatever that balance is at that point in time. Like I say, it's going down about $13,000 a month, or maybe more like about $10,000 a month. Because there's an interest portion, but anyway. So we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. We'll see. But that's the other debt service that we're making. So a year from now, the debt service would only have the general obligation bond and potentially this. The other one would have been paid off in early December is the current maturity date. So we've talked about a number of the other funds briefly. The general fund, 25.5 million in requirements. Revenues adjusted up 651 from the prior year. Appropriations up. Big chunk of appropriations increase, and some of that relates to that debt service that we just talked about, because we're having to transfer everything we get from Amazon plus whatever the remaining difference is to get to the total payoff amount into that debt service fund, as well as, of course, other factors. Estimated property taxes, estimating based on the data that we've gotten, 5.2% increase. There's one of the challenges we have is with all the development, when does new property go onto the property tax rolls? And part of that is, of course, when the construction gets completed, when there's certificate of occupancy issued, when the assessor makes the determination that the asset is in service, then it can go on the property tax rolls. So we sometimes have expectations and things didn't get finished till February and the deadline was January 1. So it misses a cycle. But that's part of what we're seeing as the increase. What I'm basing, we've got a 439,000 increase. So that chart, I think I've shown you similar to that one just 6 months ago at the mid-year budget committee meeting, or I guess that wasn't 6 months ago. But anyway, so based on the data that we've got, that's where I'm expecting us to be. The Ray had mentioned the Amazon. Well, that's when it's going to roll onto the regular tax rolls off of the enterprise zone exemption, which is where it is now. So that's sort of where I see us on the property tax horizon. General fund proposed reserve the 2.5 million in general fund plus the $3 million contingency that is proposed in there. So we have general fund revenue of 16.4, general fund expenditures of 23, which gives us that $6.6 million budgeted deficit. So the preliminary deficit is that 6.6. We back out the 3 million of contingency. So the net spend down, which slightly contradicts my illustrious city manager in that we don't ever spend the balance. We only do so deliberately with city council and budget committee intentional direction that we spend down on things to build things, like the year that we rebuilt Imagination Station, we caused the general obligation, the general fund balance to go down. There was an intentional choice to spend $1 million on that play structure. Here we've got a spend down of that 3.36, and that's a whole variety of capital projects. So we start out with the 8 million of beginning fund balance. I know Tanny had sent some questions in late this afternoon, and I haven't had a chance to work through them yet, but related to some of this, we had the estimated expenditures. I've got it 15 million based on my budgeting. A lot of that is because we've got capital projects that we have budgeted this year that we're just not going to be able to accomplish. There's just not enough time left in the calendar, in the budget year. That's why they're also carried over. Estimated revenues. So now I've got a preliminary net increase of 1 million coming out of this fiscal year, which is what gets me to, what does that do, Dad? Oh, there we go. Gets me to that $9 million beginning fund balance that's portrayed in the budget. So then we get into the 2023, 2024, the proposed budget that's before you. Again, we start off with that 9 million that we were just at the bottom of the previous page. This year's estimated ending fund balance, our starting balance for next fiscal year. Budgeted expenditures, budgeted revenues, there's our preliminary net. We back out the contingency, so we end up with that $3.6 million net reduction, which would forecast us to go having a ending fund balance of 5.4 or 5.5 from starting at 9. So that's this is one added just for Ray. When he and I were talking about it this morning, he wanted to go back and say, well, what's it, every year we show the chart and we show it going down into the future years, but we don't ever get to those lower levels. So what was it back several years ago? So I went back and dug up this one. It was sort of the best one I could find to apply, but that was back in 2000, almost to the day. Well, I guess it is the 17th. The budget meeting portrayed or forecast what was the general, what was the ending fund balance going to be, out here to 24, 25. And, we were going to hit a high of that, 5.6 and continue to work our way down. Well, here's where we are. And of course, we've gone significantly above that 5 for several of those years. And 24, 25 is about $2 million above what we forecasted it would be back in 2019. Of course, we're much further out. Of course, anything beyond a year is squishy because, lots of things are bound to happen. So, summary on the budget message. There we go. Allocates limited city funding to support the goals of the city, and as we undertake the significant expenditures associated with the urban renewal plan. We're doing the debt payoff, and we're also transferring or loaning another 1.5 million to the Urban Renewal Agency because we've gotten these wonderful grants for building the trail. But both of those grants, the one from Metro and from the state, both require a match. And of course, the Urban Renewal Agency doesn't have money. It comes to Daddy. It comes to the general fund for the money. So we're transferring that 1.5 million, that's in the budget, so that we are able to execute on the trail and able to have the matching funds that have to be spent in order to get the reimbursement of the 2.7 million, is it, if I remember right, for combined of those two grants to be able to build that $4 million trail along the Sandy River. That's part of what that spend down is. That combined with all the capital projects that, we're trying to get accomplished. Anyway, I got off on a tangent there. Summary, the economy continued to slow over the remainder of 2023. Again, I expect it to be a mild recession based on all the indicators, but we'll have to wait and see. It's intended to address particularly the needs of the URA, as well as the various service and maintenance projects that we use a portion of the reserves to fund. Budget maintains essential service levels, invest in public infrastructure and the capital needs, and pursues those goals and objectives. So, I'm gonna get that to stop. There we go. Mr. Chair.
Councilor Glanz.
Thank you. A couple questions on if we need to spend money with the outlet mall in order to get a road through to the URA, where would that funding come from?
Well, that is a very great example. You gave me a nice tee up for part of why I have proposed $3 million of contingency in the general fund. Because when we get to negotiating with Capstone and working the package together, there is likely to be economic incentives that are going to be required to make the deal work that we're going to have to fund, whether it's going to be transportation or stormwater infrastructure, water lines relocated, any number of potential costs that we might have to agree to do. We have to have the funds available, but I don't know what those projects are, so I'm not specifically budgeting $1.2 million for transportation improvements, since I don't really know that's what the number is going to be, or that it's going to be for transportation. That's why I proposed $3 million for contingency in the general fund. When we get to a deal that the council and the URA board, of course, would discuss multiple times and ultimately agree to, that would be part of the discussion is, okay, how are we going to fund those? And that's why I want to have money in contingency, because I don't want to be in a position of telling the council, sorry, you can't agree to the deal with Capstone because all the money is locked up in unappropriated ending fund balance and we can't get to it. But again, it's not in a place where staff can get to it when it's in contingency. Only the council can get to it.
The other thing, Eric, well, just saying, to keep answering your question, in some ways it can be a lot more complicated than that, because when you're building a road or building a sewer or building water lines, there are other funds outside the general funds that can be tapped to create those type of infrastructure projects. And then overriding all that, of course, is the urban renewal $7 million authority from the citizens that's only been partially used, that you could possibly use some of that. Also, the city still has to front that money, but then it comes back through the tax incremental financing. So
that's some of what we'll get to with the urban renewal.
Okay, yeah, it's
short.
Yeah, infrastructure stuff on that property is fairly complicated in terms of all the different funds, but Eric's point is very valid. We've got to remain flexible because we're not sure what that's going to look like when we get there.
And also I would differ slightly with Ray from can to say may, because the infrastructure funds have got to have projects that are in them that are approved, that, that have been through a process. We can't just decide to say, well, there's $5 million in the stormwater fund, we're going to use $4 million for the URA, unless there's a project that's already been approved in the master plan, that's on the CIP, that's been adopted and approved, that would be toward the URA. Now, there may be some pieces on some projects that might be able to contribute toward it. But, again, it goes back to the first part of Ray's comment, it's going to be complicated as to how we address that. Anyway.
And then one other quick question. When we put in like FTEs and things like that, that does not include health insurance when we list out like what a salary or what the expense of an FTE in a specific category. Like, let's say there's one that's $100,000 and somebody makes, I don't know, $90,000. Does the line item in the budget match salary, or does it include things like medical, dental?
Well, there are different line items in I'll just say, in the water fund, there's a water operator 1, 2, 3, a chief operator, et cetera. There are line items there that reflect their salary dollars that are kind of by position. And then further down on that page, there's going to be a section where there's Kaiser Healthcare or Blue Cross Healthcare and dental costs, and then kind of all the other payroll, FICA and PERS and unemployment, et cetera. So the money is in there, but it's not in one line item. It's based on what the object of the expense is.
Okay. And I thought I heard Ray say, or you say, that the succession, the two positions there, that those were not listed as FTEs, those were in a different category or something?
Well, they're,
No, I think the point was, those two were, yes, they are FTE, they're listed as FTE, but they're essentially being paid for with a closing of another budget line item that we had before. In this case, the engineering tech, the chief engineer position is not there, and in the case of the janitorial, we will not be spending the janitorial contract budgets.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
okay, well then let's charge into the next item on the agenda. Fulfill some of another one of our regulatory obligations. Oregon shared revenues, again, this is something else we have to publish in advance, requirements, et cetera. And we'll get here. So state shared revenues, as it's referred to, there's a couple different sections, but in any case, there's a whole bunch of detail, but there's kind of fundamental steps. There has to be a public hearing before the budget committee, or not for anybody in the public to make public comment about proposed or possible uses of the state shared revenue. Then later on, when we get to budget adoption in June, there's also a separate agenda item that we have to publish notice for, that the city council has to have a public hearing on state shared revenues before the budget is adopted. And then the city has to pass a couple of different resolutions, one that establishes that they are qualified or eligible, they meet the eligibility requirements, and two separately that, yeah, we'll go ahead and take the money that the state is willing to give us. So that one of the requirements is that, you know, have to have, I believe it's at least 3 of these items. We qualify on every single one of the criteria. So in the possible uses, which is what the requirement is in the proposed budget, that has to the public comment period for before the budget committee. It's proposed the general fund items are on page 40. The liquor tax, cigarette tax, there's a general revenue sharing, those are all on 40. You'll notice that the marijuana tax line is blank. I deleted that out this year because the resolution or the ordinance rather, that the council adopted 3-4 weeks ago to ban future marijuana retailers in the city now makes us ineligible to receive shared marijuana revenue from the state. So it took that out. 3 years ago, it was about $60,000 a year when they did the decriminalization passage. What was it, Measure 101?
110.
Part of what that was, I think, 2 years ago. Then the legislature redirected 2/3 of the money that they were sharing with the cities. They redirected it to drug treatment under their logic that, okay, well, they no longer need the money for enforcement because these items, there's going to be a bunch of offenses that are no longer criminal, but we're going to use the money for drug rehab. So it's about $22,000 this year's budget that we received. So it's about $22,000 that we won't receive going forward. And then the big, single big line item is the state gasoline tax. That's split into 2 funds, page 146, and then 230. That's the 1% into the bicycle and paths fund that's required by the state statute. 1% of it has to go into that. 99% of it goes into the street fund. So that is the proposed possible uses of state shared revenue that we're required to present to the budget committee. Any questions on so the budget committee holds a hearing, we've done adequate notice, et cetera. This was what was published, et cetera. public hearing, standard business-like manner, the hundreds of people that are lined up this evening to testify on this matter, the chair will wrangle. But the other aspect of it is other city topics are not in order for that public hearing. Of course, it's the three parts like we're used to. Kenda will confirm that we haven't gotten any written comments on this. We'll see if there's any Zoom and anybody in the room, and then the chair will close that public hearing. So with that, I'll stop sharing so we can see if there's any questions.
So before we do that, I have a question from Councilor Glanz.
Yes, I have a question on the gas tax. How do we calculate what we expect to get? I've been listening to like JPACT and some of these other local groups that are talking about, as part of the need for tolling, is that gas tax revenues are down because people aren't driving as much in more fuel efficient cars and or electric vehicles.
Well, I think there's two trends that are affecting our share or what we've been receiving for gas tax. Those items that you just mentioned are pushing sort of a general decline toward the gasoline usage. However, the other side of it is, it was a year before COVID hit, I lose track of the date exactly, the state had an increase in the gas tax for the first time in like 13 years. And so that significantly raised what we were receiving. We saw a decline somewhat during COVID. It's generally recovered. What I tend to do for the gas tax, as well as the other state shared revenues, and also similarly like on the business income taxes, I tend to be conservative on estimating high on costs and low on revenue sources. So I generally take a backwards looking average of the last few years of what we've received. We generally get more revenue than what I budgeted for the gas tax and for most revenue line items.
Thank you.
Unless there's other questions, Mr. Chair, I just need you to do an open public comment on the possible uses of state shared revenue.
Absolutely. At this time, we'd like to open the public hearing for possible uses on state shared revenues. Anyone wishing to speak to the Budget Committee this evening? Kenda, did we receive any written comments? Anyone online wishing to speak? And anyone in chambers wishing to speak? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing on state shared revenue. Next one.
Okay. Then I believe we are at, public comment for the proposed budget. Again, we published a notice and as required. Again, the same kind of 5 minutes per speaker. It's got to be relevant to the budget, not other city matters, not a Q&A session on the proposed budget. Again, the same 3 written comments, Zoom in the room, and then the chair closed the state shared revenue, the public comment on the proposed budget. So with that, Mr. Chair, I turn it back to you if you would hold a public comment on the proposed budget.
Okay, good evening. At this time, we'd like to open the public comment period on the proposed budget. This is a public meeting on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2023, 2024, and any citizen may speak to any item related to the budget. Open the hearing. Any comments received? No. Anyone online wishing to speak this evening? Anyone in chambers? No. With that, we will close public comment period for this evening.
Okay, Mr. Chair, well, I had suggested on the agenda sort of our typical approach that we would take a break at this point and then come back and convene as the Urban Renewal Agency budget meeting so we can fulfill those regulatory requirements as well, the budget message as well as the public comment, unless the committee doesn't want to take a break.
Is 10 minutes long enough for everybody? Does that work? Okay, so we will reconvene at 7:57 PM. We're in recess.
Next year, last year, it's gonna end the same time as the other. Morning, how are you?
Not too bad. Good.
They were here in Craigland, they paid.
Well, it may go substantially above that, because that pre was before all the attendant meetings, because that was on they had built a, spec, but they built this, a warehouse built out for a specific tenant. Yeah, freezer, lots of others, it was basically a shell warehouse. So all of whatever their tenant improvements will also go on the tax roll, so. But a lot of the tenant improvement stuff on the equipment side has a depreciated value versus the real estate side has an appreciated value, so it's a mix. Well, yeah, but you can normal maybe this kind of hesitant only because I don't know how exactly the assessment is going to translate on the other city hall, I never bothered putting the market value on the record because it didn't matter. To some degree, it doesn't, it's not the same exactly, it's not taxed in the same manner. So I'm not sure exactly what they're going to come on because I don't know how they're going to apply it.
I just assume.
They applied it earlier on, and it's already in the numbers that are on taxable, or whether it's going to apply it later on. That's the why I was hedging about. I'm having 50 chickens, well, I might only have 800 chickens.
That's why.
For cubes.
But you're supposed to
Well, actually, we're supposed to be paying 25% of what the total amount for all the chickens. Our share is like 20%, so it's roughly 25%. That goes back to our permanent rate issue. Oh, hey there. Hopefully I didn't say too many things that caused you to. I don't know, Kenda, whether we're recording or not. Are you still recording?
All right. We are reconvening the Budget Committee meeting for the City of Troutdale. And at this time, we will recess the meeting and start with the Urban Renewal Agency. So at this time, I'd like to call to order the Budget Committee for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale for Monday, April 17th, 2023.
Chair Lauer,
Here.
Director Ripma, Director Caswell, Director One,
Here.
Director White, Director Wittrin, Director Glantz,
Present.
Chair Stephenson,
Here.
Jean Bent,
Here,
Chris Barney, Victoria Rizzo,
Here.
Rich Allen.
Here.
We have a quorum. Okay. Glenn White has entered the room. Okay, you are up, Mr. Ray Young.
Well, thank you. I'm definitely going to be much shorter than the last time I did comments at the beginning of a budget review. The only thing I'm going to say about the urban renewal budget is, one, it's going to be an exciting year for what's happening next year. I know as much as my public works director is going to look at me oddly when I say this. He may be hopeful also, but he's more cautious than this, that by the end of the next budget year, we're starting to move dirt over on the Sandy River Trail. That would be amazing if we could do it next year. I know he's smiling at me now, like, okay, maybe. You know, don't start walking on it yet. And the second thing is, as we just talked about a minute ago, as we were talking about the financing and different things on the property out there for the development, the budget has a lot of large numbers without definition on them, and that's for good reason. It's because next budget year, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening on the urban renewal site, whether it's the trail, whether it's the development, and we just don't have all the details yet, but we have to have a budget that's flexible enough to be able to do all the things we need to do to create on that property something that the Troutdale citizens have been waiting over 20 years to come to fruition. And next year's really going to start getting those budgets. Nothing goes on out there, of course, without full involvement of the council and knowing what's going on out there. So I just appreciate your understanding that that budget is going to be not quite as definite as we would like, because there are so many variables that we're going to be dealing with over the next 3 or 4 months before we get a next budget year to make sure that project comes off well. So thank you.
Okay, and I guess next up is Mr. Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see if I can get this to go. Okay, Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee presentation for the proposed budget. Come on, there we go. So roll call, opening comments, duties, responsibilities, local budget law training, all the same as was an hour and a half ago. So all the same stuff. So the next obligation or regulatory requirement, the budget message for the Urban Renewal Agency. So 2006 is when the voters approved. The agency is a separate legal entity, which is why we go through this process and have these separate budgets and the separate meetings, et cetera. And the goal for the agency is to public improvements and to promote optimal redevelopment or development of the Troutdale riverfront area. The original plan from 2006 anticipates a mixed retail, business, recreation uses. Vision plan, we talked about in multiple meetings before: transportation access, riverfront park, public plaza, parking, pedestrian overpass, connection to the downtown, etc. That's the site from in the plan document. It's a little bit better site that with the stuff cleared. So the Urban Renewal Agency, unlike the city with its 32 different funds, or whatever the heck it is exactly, is composed of 2 funds. So much simpler. The Riverfront Renewal Fund, which is essentially the general fund for the Urban Renewal Agency, and then the URA Debt Service Fund, which is a particular kind of animal related to urban renewal agencies. So has about $214,000 in cash. Currently, it owes the city $400,000 in TIF-backed debt. The $5 million that we talked about, the city paying off the outside bondholders. Why is this doing that? Paying off the outside bondholders. The Urban Renewal Agency still owes the city $5 million for that that loan. It's non-TIF back. Same thing with the $1.5 million loan from Business Oregon. The debt service fund, there's about $48,000 in cash. and it's got the $400,000 of loan payments due. Because the unique role of an urban renewal agency debt service fund is that it collects the tax increment and it pays off the TIF debt for the Riverfront Renewal Plan fund. So the proposed budget requirements, $7 million in the Riverfront Development Fund, debt service fund, $222,000 requirements. The agency is operating on funds loaned from the city. There are provisions for grants for the trail, both from the state and from Metro, as well as provision for the additional loan from the city. We move into the post cleanup or development phase. We're finishing out the trail design. We're anticipating construction, that dirt turning that Ray talked about in the coming budget cycle. You know, the property marketing, the RFQ and so forth went out. We're working on preparing the exclusive negotiating agreement, the E&A, for the resale and development, and continuing to pursue, of course, grant funding opportunities and fulfilling those. So the confluence at Troutdale, that's the resurveyed, reconfigured. You know, when we first had the agency acquire all the real estate, it had some very odd tax lot lines from the city's former sewer treatment plant site, as well as the properties that were acquired from Eastern. The survey work was done to resurvey it so that parcel one, that somehow I've got this, it's running on its own. Anyway, that largest parcel is what would anticipate selling to the outside developer. The two parcels along the river would remain owned either by the agency, maybe ultimately transferred to the city. That remains to be seen, but they would, those parcels would house the trail in its entirety is the intended design. So seen this brochure before, but this was part of the materials that was put together as part of the educating the public about it, as well as for grant application materials, et cetera. So the Sandy River Access Plan was the basis for that design, multi-use trail, habitat enhancements, riparian restoration, removal of invasive species, et cetera. Recreation opportunities, access to the river, connectivity both north and south, up to the depot, and then also connecting to the 40-mile loop to the north. It's all part of the vision. Public access to the watershed, this was all the part of the plan funded by Metro with the grant back in 2014, I believe it was. So back then, the cost, May 2014, 4.4, very early on. So the requirements in the proposed budget, $540,000 in the materials and services category for a range of consulting, economic development, marketing, engineering, planning, sort of anything that isn't a capital expenditure is sort of in that bucket. And then we have 4.25 for the Sandy River Greenway Trail that relates to some of the grant application materials that we had, et cetera. For the trail construction. The URA debt is the city-backed full faith and credit debt. The $5 million was loaned from the city to the URA. Based on the terms of the IGA, the URA is only obligated to repay the city upon sale of the real estate, even though the city has got to pay the bondholders based on what the external borrowing provisions were. Loan proceeds were used for, Loan proceeds were used to purchase the eastern parcels, and of course the demolition and site clearing and fulfilling all of the DEQ requirements from the prospective purchaser agreement that we entered into that provides the liability protection that runs with the land for the subsequent landowner that acquires the property. The 1.5, again, is also full faith and credit. The city is the one that's obligated to repay Business Oregon. And again, the IGA, the URA is obligated to pay the city upon the sale of the property. And it was to help finish out all those obligations to the prospective purchaser agreement. The debt service fund, the other fund, has two tasks. One, it's responsible for collecting what's known as the TIF, or the tax increment financing. It collects that tax revenue. I mean, it sits there and the county assessor dumps it in there. It's what it does to collect it. And then it's responsible for repaying TIF-backed debt. And that's tied to that $7 million of maximum indebtedness that was adopted in the original plan. So the debt repayment from the tax increments, funds are loaned to the Riverfront Development Fund, but they're paid from, or repaid rather, from the debt service fund as the TIF comes in annually. And currently, the way we have it structured, the agency owes the city $400,000 of TIF-backed debt. The incremental assessed value for the projected budget is $11,855,000, resulting calculated tax increment is $167,000. That's all outlined in the budget. You know, this is just the graphic that shows the concept of TIF. There's the frozen base that's fixed at the point in time the agency is established. As development is built in the area, it builds assessed value, which generates the increment revenue, which is what's intended to repay the TIF-backed debt. And then once the projects are all completed and all the debt pays off, then that entire balance comes back to all of the taxing districts. But right now, basically 75 cents on the dollar is coming from jurisdictions other than the city of Troutdale to fund this, primarily from Multnomah County, the Multnomah County Library, Reynolds School District, Port of Portland, East Multnomah County Soil and Water Conservation District. I forget all the different overlapping district names. That portion that's on the increment value, their portion is coming to the URA to help fund that repayment. So again, the assessed value, or that frozen base of 19 million, that stays consistent throughout the entire life of the agency. As the assessed value grows, that difference, or that increment value grows. The current calculated permanent consolidated rate is $15.07 per thousand. The agency gets that full $15.07 on that increment value. And then, of course, we have the uncollectibles. So that's how we get to that 167 that's in the budget. This table is also on one of the pages in the book. So the URA financing requires loans from the city because it's so constrained. There's no outside lender that is going to loan to the Urban Renewal Agency on its own. There's the current TIF-based amount. There's the 5 million that we mentioned before, and the 1.5. So, you know, as we sit here right now, it's 6.9 million that the agency owes. So, you know, if they were to sell the property next week for $7 million, in theory, they would turn around and write the city a check for $7 million and pay off all the debt. Not that we expect that to happen, but anyway. So the 5 million, as I mentioned before, the city is the one that's obligated to repay that. They're the ones that did the borrowing. They pledged under the state statutes the city's general fund as repayment source for those external lenders. URA is expected to sell or use the proceeds from the sale of the property to repay the city that loan amount, both that 5 million and the 1.5 that the city is also paying. So the remainder of the projects, the city may have to borrow more money again to turn around and loan to the Urban Renewal Agency to build out its projects, depending on the scale and the size and what is agreed to. The Sandy River Access Plan, we've talked about the other development costs and incentives, infrastructure improvements that we don't know quite yet. Again, the city may have to borrow. The remaining TIF back debt, because again, that $7 million maximum indebtedness cap, there's, where did I put in there? There is 4.8 million of that left. So the agency can borrow another 4.8 million that can eventually, not how I got this thing on to run automated, but I can't get it to stop. Anyway, the 7 million is a cap on what can be repaid from the TIF financing, from the division of revenue as it's referred to. And there's, like I say, there's 4.8 million left that the agency could borrow. It becomes important because the deadline to incur that is March of 2026. And again, as I mentioned, 75 cents on the dollar comes from other taxing jurisdictions. So if the agency fails to borrow that full amount up to that full 7 million, essentially we're leaving money on the table that would be funded by those other sources. We don't have to fix that this budget cycle, but it is coming. There's only essentially another cycle or two that is beyond that. So the second round of the long-term debt is expected to be repaid slowly. We're going to have to see the tax assessed value rise as a result of the development before we'll start to see any meaningful TIF money come in that could service that debt. So again, in conclusion, the budget supports the fiscal year plans, continue moving forward, construction, hopefully beginning of the trail, and preparing for the promising development project. So, questions? Nope. Stop there.
Councilor Glanz.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of a issue trying to get my head around what's URA in paper and what's actually impacting city budgets. If we get that, so in order to do the full 7 million indebtedness that basically pulls money from other sources, do we have to borrow it from the city? I'm kind of confused how that works. Well,
the Urban Renewal Agency has to borrow the money.
Right.
To date, the only place that they could have borrowed money is from the city. Because it's been so, the way it was structured, it was so limited, there really wasn't any lender out there that would be able to, it currently generates $167,000 in revenue, so it can't really borrow much from a bank. The bank's gonna look at it and go, well, you can't repay $7 million with that. They're not gonna loan it. So it's gonna have to be the city functioning as the bank, which is exactly what we did for that 5 million of full faith and credit borrowing that we did in 2018. The city was the borrower because it was creditworthy. It turned around and lent the money then to the agency.
Okay, so we as in the URA, we borrow the money from the city. The URA pays us back at the 25 cents on the dollar. Well,
I'm sorry to confuse you related to that. The TIF money is based on that full $15.07 a thousand. The City of Troutdale's portion of that total overlapping taxing jurisdiction number is 25%. So 75% of that money is coming from other jurisdictions. That's what I'm trying to explain. I mean, if the Urban Renewal Agency didn't exist, the city would get 25% of whatever that 167,000 is. That's what we would be getting in additional tax revenue this year if the Urban Renewal Agency didn't exist. The rest of that 167,000 is coming from Multnomah County, from the school district, from Mount Hood Community College, from the Soil and Water Conservation District, the Port of Portland, the library, again, all the other taxing jurisdictions.
And that's basically just redistributing how the taxes would ordinarily be distributed, where the URA gets to keep more of it rather than sharing it with the outside agencies.
Yeah, it's based strictly on that increment value, that 11,855,000. That's what those other taxing districts give up their share of taxes on. And so that's why as you build in the URA, that assessed value goes up. So if we get a $50 million project out there, or $50 million of assessed value out there, all of a sudden we're getting $15 a thousand on 50 million.
Okay.
And that's what generates the large tax increment financing revenue that is then used to pay off the maximum indebtedness. But we aren't there yet. All we've got is that low level of assessed value.
The value is property tax assessed values, right? So they build an apartment building and it's worth $2 million. And that portion, it ties to the property tax value, correct?
Right, whatever type of property or whatever type of development out there, and there's, complications in terms of how the assessor puts it on the tax roll, and it's referred to as a change property ratio. But yeah, if there's a $20 million of development that goes on out there that translates into, $12 million of assessed value, well, then we get that $15 a thousand on 12 million, not on whatever the market value.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Mayor, do you have your hand up?
Okay, so we are at public comment. Again, we had to publish the same kind of notice and requirement for this budget and this budget committee to receive public comment on this proposed budget, since it's a separate legal entity, separate budget, et cetera. Same thing, business-like manner, 5 minutes. Comments relative to the URA budget, not a Q&A session, 3 parts, written, Zoom, physically present, and chair closes, and then committee discussion. So if you would, Mr. Chair, if you would open the public comment period on the Urban Renewal Agency budget.
At this time, I'd like to open the public comment period for the budget for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale. Anyone submitting written comments? Anyone online wishing to testify or comment? Anyone here? No? Same 3? No? No. Okay, at this time, we'll close the public comment period for the budget for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay, well, I think as the agenda list that, we would have to conclude what we would do for this budget this evening, unless there's additional discussion that the committee or the chair want to have now on the Urban Renewal Agency budget. Otherwise, we would recess this and go back into the city budget committee meeting. That's up to you, Mr. Chair.
No, I'd just like to say, I can recall a time or two where there's been a council decision that I haven't necessarily thought was great, and sometimes I point those out. And the actions that have been taken with the urban renewal area have not been those decisions. Frankly, you guys have done a lot, and it's taken a lot of courage to make the decisions that you did. You've taken something that really resembled Hanford more than anything else. And, Eric was talking about 20 years, we've been waiting for this. Well, if you lived here, you smelled it a lot longer than 20 years. And it was really bad all the time. And I just feel blessed that the council made the decisions they did to get the property in the condition it is, that it can now be sold and can be developed. And we've seen some great proposals for the property, and it's gonna take a lot of money and a lot of work to get this finished. But I think you'd all agree we're closer than we've ever been before. That's just what I wanted to say about that. Anyone else have any comments or questions before we adjourn? Yes?
Yeah, I'd just like to piggyback on that, Tanny, because I know you've been involved a lot, and you were on the TCAP committee that helped get us down to a finalist. But it sounds bad when you hear 20 years waiting for this project until you realize that's how long it took to get no further action from DEQ. Without that, it was impossible for any of us to go forward. But, you know, I think that's a super unique piece of property. The factory outlet mall sold for 28 million, and it's not on the river. So, you know, I have high expectations for this property. And I think we should caution, you know, because we are going to be in a negotiation about throwing out potential sale numbers and stuff. Someone could be listening and think that's the price. So just to keep that in mind.
Anyone else?
I would just like to add that you've got a very long email from me on, long attachment Friday night from me from questions that Gene had generated. Tanny has given us some more questions this afternoon that we will get answered out hopefully by the end of tomorrow. And I'll, of course, copy everybody on the committee. And if anybody else has other detailed questions, love to get them, to get answers. The reason I like to have a little time, at least a day or day and a half, because it takes time to do that, so.
I think you're a few minutes early with that comment, but it's
I am
probably
early,
good.
We're still
but early and often, before we adjourn the URA meeting.
All right.
Okay.
Anything else before we adjourn?
Adjourn, I just wanted to get that out.
I gotcha. Okay. Okay, then at this time, I'll take a motion to adjourn the Budget Committee meeting for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale.
So moved.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion by Mayor Lauer, second by Victoria Rizzo. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned and we are reconvened back into the Budget Committee meeting for the City of Troutdale. And here he comes.
Okay. We will dive into the first batch of individual budgets and get through what we get through this evening, and then we will pick up wherever we left off on Wednesday night and continue on. So, continuing operations and activities, projects, etc. That's sort of the main theme. There are general fund divisions that are managed by Public Works. Solid Waste Recycling Division is one of them. That's one of Gene's edit or question comments that he mentioned. I fixed the allocation on the how we were allocating the salary, and I forgot to fix the narrative, which is why we had 0.1 versus 0.3. But no change in staffing, just changing how we slice and dice. So that was one of my many errors in the budget. As I mention every year, there's always glitches that I have. Some I can fix on my own, others I will end up bringing to you as budget corrections. So solid waste recycling is on page 75. Again, I just was talking about the minor change. Couple of mandated programs from Metro. I'm out of date in the budget. I had them pending. They were pending for a while, and then Metro delayed the effective implementation of some of them for a while, but they're now all fully there, so I need to take out that reference of pending Metro ordinances because they are fully there and fully applicable on it's actually, that reference is actually on page 78. Parks Department, in particular, it's the ongoing operations of maintaining the city parks. There are some capital projects related to parks. And if you go to page 83, the capital is on page 90. Again, some carryover items. Get to here, the skate spot, the North Beaver Creek. So this is just conceptual. This is not a promise of what it's going to look like. It's an example. I showed some of this to you last year. And proposed skate park. It's not the exact committed to pouring concrete out there on it. It's again just illustrative to communicate the issue. These are the same things that I showed you last year. They're inching forward on the design and permitting and kind of all of those preparatory items. So nobody's out there with a shovel pouring concrete quite yet. Construction and design, we've got it budgeted, and it's split between the general fund, this page 90, and then 6% of it is coming out of the Parks SDC fund because it is an item that is eligible back there. Sort of goes back to Ray's comment about using infrastructure funds. Well, things have to be eligible, so we can take a portion of this. So we've got it budgeted in those two different spots for that project. The North Beaver Creek Bridge, again, this is the same shots that I've shown previous years to illustrate sort of, well, yeah, there is a need. It isn't just wishful thinking that it might need to be replaced. And then again, stressing this is just an example, an illustrative example. It's not a promise of what it's going to look like. It's just, something that would be better than what was on those previous slides. That's the Beaver Creek Bridge, and that is still an evolving project, grant-wise, design-wise, so we'll see if we're able to make physical progress on that one this coming fiscal year. The dog park, which as I mentioned several years ago, it was in, it was out, it was in the budget. That is going to be largely accomplished between now and the end of this fiscal year, but there will be some carryover. So construction, between now and June 30, and then we've got some money in the budget for closeout, punch list, as well as, okay, now that all the dust is settled, where do we need to put a bench? Or where do we need to put, a trash can or some other, quote, amenities? So that's part of what is listed in or in the budget for that on page 90. I'll stop for a moment and see if there's questions on parks.
Mr. Mann?
Yeah, how solid is the grant on that bridge?
Just last week, traded with the grant administrator down in Salem. She just was happy to know we're moving forward and working on our cost estimates to get a bit of detail on it. So she essentially said it's based on a federal grant, and she says those take years sometimes to pay out. So right now, she says it's not threatened or worried about losing at this point. So we're good.
But how much do you think it's 150 an acre?
150,000.
So you feel pretty solid that it's gonna happen?
Well,
Eventually.
not yet. All right. It depends on what our ultimate costs are gonna be, honestly. If our costs come back at the really high end of what our worst nightmare is, say $700,000, boy, that's gonna have to be, council really love the bridge to go down that canyon and want to do it. If it comes in at maybe 400,000, then it's a much easier to pull that one off. So a lot of it is, I really hope so, because Beaver Creek Canyon is beautiful. We have a trail that goes up and down both sides of the canyon, and putting in a new bridge would down would be amazing. amenity for the citizens. So I'm really hoping we can afford to pull it off. $150,000 grant helps a lot. So, and the best I can do, I get those better numbers.
Yeah, it's kind of pointless to have the trail if you don't have a bridge.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. They tell me I can't just drop a couple big logs down and put some pickets across it for a walk. Won't work. I'd like to.
We gotta get it built because the price keeps going up.
Yeah, everything.
Well, I think some of the requirements are also driving the price. I mean, back when it was built, with the way it was built, there weren't as many limitations and restrictions related to impacting streams and watershed and some of those things. And that's some of what's driving the delay and some of what's driving the costs, you know. And not that those are bad things, but they just are reality. We can't just swap out what was there.
Floodplain requirements particularly, they go up through the hydro.
We can't fund the skate park out of the park improvement fund. It just seems like it's a new facility.
Well, there's, if you'll harken back to maybe some previous. And by the way, I just want to say thank you, Chairman, but for those who know, I'm Travis Holton, the new Public Works Director, but you're a long-time chief engineer and very social justice for the city for the Public Works for these for many years. Yeah, to your question, Chair Stafford, there's a two-pronged test on improvement funds. It's not just, is it a new facility, is it improvement, it has to serve growth. So when the CIP was last updated, we had to figure out a way to calculate what share of that is for growth. It's a regional citywide facility. So the best metric that we could apply to it was projected population growth through build out, which was 6% of the build out population. So 6% eligible for improvement.
Yeah, and so that's why it's split in those two different pages.
Any other questions from you?
I just want to check the folks online. Were you able to hear Travis okay?
Barely, I was using closed caption and that seemed to record it.
Kenda is addressing it with another microphone, so hopefully you'll be able to hear him.
My apologies. I didn't want to turn my laptop mic on because I know what kind of, I might blow everyone's ears out with feedback.
Okay. Moving on. So, come on. Facilities Department, this is where the one FTE, you know, the janitor that Ray talked about earlier, the reduction in contract cost services, and then the capital projects. So the capital projects, again, for facilities are on page 96. So we've got the repair and repave of the CCB parking lot and right outside this room. That was something that was on this year's budget, and we've run into some additional twists and turns and requirements, and so it's not going to get completed this fiscal year, which is why we need to have it in next year's budget. And you know, I know the street work is also something that's a bane of Travis's project managers every year because it's so dependent upon weather. Get everything all scheduled to go to do that pavement recoating, and it rains, and then it's got to be rescheduled 6 weeks out because the contractor has got everything stacked up, and now we move from one fiscal year to the other, and it is a challenge. Well, this is not quite as extensive as, you know, 4 blocks of a neighborhood, but it is also impacted by weather. ADA upgrades is a carryover. Downtown parking lot lighting and cameras is a kind of a slowly ongoing, evolving project that Ray's been working on. And then the depot, I refer to it as the plaza. It's sort of the outside areas. The inside of the depot remodeling stuff is, you know, fairly well all done. This fiscal year, the drag on, there may be some adjustments we have to tweak internally as we get more experience operating the visitor center, because this coming summer will really, I think, be the first full-blown, close to quote normal unquote year. And, we will see what it's like to operate the visitor center, and does something come up that's gonna require some more modification, we'll have to see, but more of it's geared toward how are we gonna deal with some of the outside stuff, how is that gonna tie into sort of the trailhead of the, the URA trail comes up from underneath the railroad and it comes up to the depot. Well, we don't really want the trail to end at a kind of a mud puddle. So, so there's some pieces that still need to be worked through on that, but there's, again, the items are listed on 96, page 96 for the CCB, for the facilities. Any questions on facilities capital items?
Mr. Bent?
Ray, on this janitor, I come up with about 130,000 in the budget prox for janitorial services, 30 in the facilities, and then 86 plus for the police services building. So combined throughout all funds, about 130,000. So if we hire this janitor, I realize it could be a portion of both this fiscal year, but let's say you hire them, then the 24-25 budget would have throughout the entire budget 0 janitorial services budgeted?
Not completely, because I'm looking at Travis, I think that includes all our supplies, because even with our current contract, we pretty much pay for all the supplies, cleaning supplies and stuff for our janitorial, so we'll still have something for the supplies, but
Not the janitorial contracted
Right.
services. So they would be 100,
yes.
100% limit, because there's about 10,000 in public works.
Yeah,
A
it's
fourth
scattered.
for this, a fourth for
That
that.
contract, they work at all our facilities, so it's scattered around amongst, those costs are scattered around
So
amongst
just
various
so I have a
departments.
clear understanding, it would eliminate all contracted janitorial services, not supplies, but services, if we hired this.
That's the intent, that's correct.
Because,
Yes.
I guess just to clarify, what I was looking at was I saw 86,250 in police, 30,000 in facilities, 2,750 in water, streets, public works maintenance, public works management, and storm sewer, and 2,733 in sewer, right? And the reason I'm bringing that up is it looks like the facilities and the other public works departments, those costs won't go away under the new system.
As would the contract services for this facility, for the police facility, so this custodian would be intended to recover all of that.
Okay, because this one, the 86,250 was still in there.
Yeah,
Well, right,
I
the
left
contract
I left that
services-
in there intentionally, and I will right up front say, the confusion over how it's budgeted in there, a lot of it is my difficulty in figuring out how to kind of pull it out, because as Travis mentioned, right now, we get an invoice, and the distribution for the coding of that invoice has got like about 9 different lines on it. So it's scattered in a number of places. I'm confident I haven't gotten it all properly cleaned up. But part of why I left it in the police facility wise is we have an obligation to provide it under our lease contract with the sheriff's office, and there are certain requirements to be able to do janitorial work inside that secured facility. So I may have to phase in depending on how this works, which is, again, why we needed to have money both in the personnel bucket as well as in the contracted services bucket. A year from now, hopefully, it'll be a lot clearer and I'll have a better handle on how exactly we're gonna handle it. There may still be some costs allocated to various locations, but they'll come through different line items, so. If that wasn't sufficiently confusing.
No, that helps.
No, but the goal, a year from now, when you're looking at the budget for 24-25, looking at Travis, he's looking at me, you should see a relatively neutral budget for that next year that is not spending any more than we have been for contract services when we have our new person up and running at speed.
And that's what I mean, you would have 0 janitorial budget line items.
Right.
For contracted services. You'd still have janitorial supplies.
Right.
I understand that. Because when I looked at the personnel in a lot of the different budgets, in a lot of the different funds, excuse me, in the budget, I would just average it and look at the personnel section and add that total cost up and divide it by the number of FTEs.
Right.
And the average of all of them combined that I looked at, which wasn't all of them, but it ranged from about the high 120s to the mid 130s per FTE. And that's why I wanted to say if you got about 130,000, I think it's pretty accurate, currently budgeted.
Yeah, right. My understanding, talking with our Parks Facility Superintendent, is right now we spend about 100, somewhere between 120 and 130,000 on the janitorial contract, all told.
Services. Yes.
Yes.
Then
Not
that
including
would
the
be-
supplies.
So to me, Ray, that would be like a push. That's what,
That's the idea.
because it's
That's
not
the
just the
idea.
employee, it's
Yeah.
the whole idea that it's the entire
Got it.
cost of the
Yeah.
employee, not just the wages of the employee.
Dang, you caught us. No, I understand. Normally, you gotta figure, I don't know, I use a hard and fast rule that it's about 1.5 of salary is what the total cost is. In terms of salary, you're about 1.5 for total in, for all the benefits and everything.
I was just looking for my notes. I had scribbled out some notes to try and, I came up with 95,000 and change in terms of the salary and benefits
For that position.
for that position. That's under the assumption that we can hire it at the grade that I calculated at. Given this labor market, we're gonna have to see whether we can actually hire at that grade level. But that's what I'm currently, estimating.
But the boundary you're giving us gives us a little wiggle room there.
Well, yeah, and that cost keeps going even
Yeah.
after that person retires. So that's why I wanted the 130, if the average is 130, and let's just say we save that much on contracted services, which is what you're saying, which is about what I got, then that should cover all of that well into the future and the retirement of that person down the road. Because those costs keep going even after he retires, you replace it with another janitor, just got that much more you're paying.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just say a couple words on it. I mean, the whole concept, the whole intent was to replace the contracted services with a staff member, cost neutral, and we actually get more bang for the buck because there are limitations on what you can get from a contract janitorial service. And frankly, even the term janitor, I like to use the term custodian.
Yeah.
Because this is somebody that we would have available, for lack of a better way to put it, at our disposal, as opposed to a contractor who has a set, he has a set list of things he's going to do for you, and they're doing, and putting aside the fact that they do this in the evening, so it's a little hard to monitor quality control and things like that, rather than where you have a staff member who's going to be doing all those things. You're going to have a lot better supervision and oversight of that person, and you're going to be able to have them help out with other things.
Yeah.
We have our other parks, we have one facilities person right now. The park staff has to help them out with a lot of things. This is somebody that you could tap, that's going to be here working, during probably a different work schedule than most people, a little later in the day, but they'll be here for part of the regular work day, so that when something comes up and that facilities person needs a hand, they've got a resource there. You don't have that with the contractor. So the intent was to spend about the same amount of money, but get more bang for the buck and get a better, more flexible resource.
Yeah, and back in 2007, 2008, we used to have 2 of those facilities.
That's right.
And, through the economic downturn and position elimination and retirements, we scaled it back, which is partly why we have contracted janitorial service, whereas we didn't used to have it. It used to be handled by those 2. And that's back when we were, 12,000 population, or I don't know, whatever, but.
Yeah, under those conditions, I'm totally in favor of that.
David wanted to add
Just one more
something.
thing to add to that is that, in an emergency response scenario, you also have an additional.
David, we can't hear you if you're not near your microphone, so come up here next.
the mayor.
So I just wanted to add that in addition to the janitorial services that they'll provide, there'll also be an additional body in the case of an emergency event, such as snow and ice event, or such that we need an additional body to jump in at that time.
Thank you.
Okay, ready to move forward? Okay, so we get into the operating funds. Those, we touched on the general fund division. So Public Works Internal Services Fund, page 154. This is where we talked about Ray talked about the staff increases. So we have the equipment maintenance tech that we talked about need to capture that institutional knowledge, as well as over time, the city's infrastructure systems have gotten bigger. There's more stuff for them to maintain and take care of. That's the one piece. And then the engineering tech position that was talked about. They're both in that fund. They're in two different divisions, but that's where both of them are. The capital projects, I don't think there's anything particularly meaningful. We still have replace our 2003 Astro van. That's a carryover because we can't get the damn thing from the manufacturer. So, we've got to have money in the budget year that it finally arrives and we have to pay the check. So we're not buying two vans. It's just, we're still trying to get, I did get an update from Aaron. So now it's got 110,060 miles on it. Whereas I think last year's budget, it was 104,000. So we're,
Do
we
we wanna
continue to
do
get our
that?
money's worth out of it.
Do we want to do that? Because it would almost be a classic.
Well, yeah. Who
mag wheels.
knows what we're gonna get at auction?
There you go.
And then I think the only other kind of change is in the budget on a number of the funds, you'll see boiler replacement at the shop system, which is the shop building, has distribution of costs across a number of funds, this one being one of them, but the boiler system has reached the end of its useful life and is going to require a replacement. So we've got money budgeted in pieces in several places. That's really the only other meaningful item on that capital item, that capital section. The operating funds, so we get into the sewer on the capital again on the page 142 is where the capital items list. There's really no change in the operations side of it. There's no staffing changes. There may or may not be some reallocation between storm and sewer, but it's the same FTEs. It's just, as they graduate into different job categories, sometimes it's a 50-50 split, sometimes it's a 60-40 split or a 70-30 split. So sometimes we have a migration between funds, but there is no additional staffing. The capital side again is on page 142. I mean, it's a significantly lower amount because that was the pump station 2 project that was down on Frontage Road in front of the boot barn that Travis is herding them to the finish line.
Start up in the next couple weeks.
So we're going from 1.1 million on the capital to down to 340,000 in the coming year. I don't think there's any particular notable items. Water, on the page 131, I got David to send me a picture on one of these items because I was like, what the heck are you talking about? A hydro evacuation truck, routine pickup truck replacements, a lot of that is also carryover because we can't get just ordinary pickup trucks either, but that's a different issue. Generator for well 5 and some seismic updates for the reservoir. That's a hydrovac doohickey. And that's, I guess, a shot of it on the flatbed. But as I understand it from David, this is the proper, safe, efficient way that you do waterline excavation work currently.
If I might add, it's just, this is the most common way to excavate anymore. The days of using a backhoe to dig mechanically, hydrovacing is safe. You get to the utilities without much damage. So many different utilities in the ground, it's hard to even dig with a backhoe anymore. So, my staff primarily use a hydrovac. We occasionally use the one from the treatment plant to excavate large sites because ours is such a smaller unit, and this will help to eliminate that. Treatment plant has a lot of uses for theirs too, so sometimes it's difficult to coordinate.
And I forget, David, this is half here and half in streets?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see the other half over there, but that's, I don't know whether we're gonna get the sunshine yellow model or whether we can get it, in Troutdale teal, we'll see.
Is our janitor gonna be able to use that as well?
As soon as he gets his certification. Has to get his certification. The streets side, as I mentioned, that's where the other half of that is, but the streets capital outlay is on page 150. And the kind of ordinary pickup truck replacement, again, carryover stuff. This is where the Dunbar Avenue project that Jane is so fond of is one of the places it's being funded from, but it's sort of, I don't know, is this sort of the lead location? I don't know what the right way is to describe Dunbar Avenue, whether it's primarily a streets project with some stormwater tacked on. And
that, I think that's arguable. It's got some stormwater challenges. I mean, it's probably the primary goal of the project is more streets oriented, but the fact that the stormwater is very challenging down there makes it a pretty substantial stormwater project as well. And that whole area around that little, that's kind of the old industrial pocket of Troutdale, and the drainage has never been good down there. It's never had a proper drainage system.
I would just say challenging is almost an understatement. It floods.
Right, and the topography is so flat. There are not a lot of good places. There's no infiltration. Soils and the groundwater issues are bad, and there's a very limited options for conveyance and discharge of stormwater around there, which is why that project, I think I talked about this maybe last budget year.
Yeah.
This is a project that's near and dear to my heart because I attempted to do this project early in my career. We got all the way to bidding, and the bids were so astronomical because of fear from local contractors about the soil conditions that we had to shelve it. It's sat on the shelf for a long time now, waiting for us to try to come back and take another run at it. So very excited to see this project finally done. For waiting 20 years.
Councilor White.
Is it too late to make that a part of the Levy Ready Columbia project?
Well, the street certainly would be
qualify.
part of that, but I mean, drainage, we did just go through the unified North Troutdale Drainage Master Plan, as you recall, with the SDIC, which will become, will be part of the new, I'm forgetting what they're calling it, the new Levy Ready Columbia organization.
Yeah, whatever
basically.
it's called.
You want to see this?
That was sort of set aside as a follow-on project by the city because it's really local. I mean, the drainage issues are really local to the area around the street. It's not. Okay. I think to get into some funding, like say from Levy Ready Columbia, we would have to have more of a regional or broader reach in terms of its impact. But this is really about that street and the properties that are just right around it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really more directly involved with the levy.
Sorry?
More directly involved with the levy.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's hard to make that linkage for this little localized drainage system. Yeah.
Good try.
I appreciate the thought. We'd love, if they were willing to do something, we'd love to have it.
Okay. Stormwater, as we were just talking, segue So that's page 171 is where the capital items, again, there's no staffing changes. Again, allocation split might be slightly different year to year. Typical pickup truck items and the really meaningful items, although the materials processing station, I'm not sure I can describe that well, so whether you or David want to.
Oh, I think I can try, and David can jump in if he needs to. The name probably reflects the fact that you've got an engineer like me involved that comes up with a dry name like materials processing station. But what that really is and I think there was some funding a couple of years ago for something similar in the budget, and it never really materialized because of some issues with the property that we were looking at. But basically, it's a place where we can handle some of our less desirable materials, as well as potentially some of our more stockpiles of materials. So things like street sweepings, materials from the catch basin cleaning, drywall cleaning, some of these things that you can't just, dump anywhere, that they require some segregation, some processing, in some cases some sorting or screening. We don't have a good place to do that right now. We kind of have a sort of, seat of the pants kind of setup that we've been doing down by the treatment plant. And really, and then David and some other folks do need some more storage for stockpile materials. So this would be an area where we could set out some bays and maybe have a couple of them that are covered for some of those materials that need to be covered, where we can keep materials stored, sorted, protected where they need to be before they get processed and sent out for disposal.
And I think the other notable difference this year is the Stewart Ridge Pond project. That's sort of been a slowly evolving what exactly was going to be done up there over the last few years. And so it's now sort of coming more into focus for a project this coming year. So that's budgeted on this page as well on the 171. And then,
Mr. Mann?
What is that? Could you just elaborate on that Stewart Ridge Pond thing?
Stewart Ridge subdivision just off Troutdale Road and roughly about 17th Street.
Yeah, I know it's that.
Yeah, and there's a little sort of pocket park with a pond right there, right by the street. It's overgrown, it's got sediment, it's been filling up with sediment. The residents around there were not very happy with the appearance of it, although I'm more concerned about its function and that it's doing the jobs that it's supposed to do. So we need to go in there, we need to rehab it, pull out sediment, pull out all the invasive plants, replant it with proper plants, and we'll actually convert it into a proper stormwater quality facility in the process of doing that, which helps with our MS4 permit compliance. That's our stormwater permit through the state. And hopefully make the residents fairly happy. If you've seen previous budgets, I think this was budgeted considerably higher in previous budgets, and it, at one point was suffering from a bit of scope, what I would call scope creep in my opinion. It had kind of snowballed into this much bigger thing, and this is my attempt to rein it back into what it really needs to be focused on, which is the pond itself, and getting that rehabbed and into proper shape.
Thank you. This has been years of working with the local residents to get the right scope or the reasonable expectation of what we should do to it.
Yeah, the residents around there they take very good care of their own landscaping in their yards. They're very particular about how things look around there. So we're trying to strike that balance where we're not going overboard, but maybe hopefully doing the pond in a way that serves that water quality function and still meets with their reasonable approval of meshing with the surrounding properties.
okay, and then we get into kind of all the SDC funds, the capital improvement funds, and kind of again, they're all based on, you got to be qualified for that particular infrastructure. The project's got to be approved in the CIP. They're segregated. Again, water can't be used for streets or storm, et cetera. They're routinely budgeted to have those funds available so that if we have an opportunity to do something with a new development, we have the funds availability, but they aren't necessarily specific project oriented across all of them. The water improvement fund on page 182 on the capital side, I know that this coming year, there's the well 9 was a design project this year, and budgeting money to have some beginning of construction part of it next year, how long, all of that, and we'll see a year from now whether we've got it into another budget year, because, you know, wells are significant, you know, they aren't something we can knock out in a week, much like a pump station on Frontage Road. But again, these are all, again, siloed, focused SDC infrastructure funds. They're not going to be spent on varying things. And then, you know, this is the other side of, you know, the pairs of the SDC funds, the improvement side to increase capacity, et cetera, and limitations. These were the reimbursement funds that were established about 6 years ago. So quite a few of them have very minimal balances because we've only been collecting that reimbursement fund for the last few years. A lot of them have got design studies for development growth and, you know, master plan updates kinds of things. All of them I hopefully have gotten over time cleaned up to where I'm using the right terminology, because in some are, one set of funds allows for the system redevelopment, and the other is only for the expansion, et cetera.
Councilor Glantz.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question back on some of the capital outlay, especially what triggered it was seeing the bright yellow excavation. I'm not even sure what it was called again, and truck. Are those things that we would ever, and don't let the hair on your back raise, rent out to like Wood Village and Fairview? Do they have their own? I'm just wondering if there's any way to help spread those costs.
Yeah, I can answer that. There are pieces of equipment that we rent from time to time, and this came up on a question we were thinking about going into budget, a piece of equipment they ended up deciding not to put in the budget. In that case, it was a boom truck, and we just use this as an example. And the conversation I had with the division superintendents was, you know, whenever we have a piece, especially a new piece of equipment we haven't had before. The question that I want us to ask is, you know, how much are we going to use it? What is its purpose? How frequently is the need for it? And how does that, so that goes into the question of whether we need to buy one, or do we look at either, as you said, Councilor Glantz, renting or borrowing from a neighboring agency. And I think as David, Sean, and Tim can attest, we had that exact conversation about that boom truck. And it was kind of a close thing there for a while, but ultimately we actually concluded that we didn't need it often enough to buy that piece of equipment. We decided that that would be something that we could be okay with just renting. This hydro excavation truck, this is an essential piece of equipment for the water and streets crew these days, particularly the water crew. And to some extent, you know, I would say even the parks folks and the wastewater folks will utilize this from time to time, because when you go to excavate these days, especially anywhere where there are utilities, existing utilities, this is the absolute best way to do it. The old way of digging with a backhoe or an excavator, so much more opportunity for utility damage incidents, or even incidents that can injure a worker. The hydro excavation method is faster, more efficient, safer. It's just, it's really the way to do things these days. And these guys use it constantly. So in this case, it made sense to purchase the piece of equipment because we're using it all the time. If it was something we only use, you know, infrequently, then we would lean more towards a rental model, or leaning on one of our neighbors if we could through our mutual aid agreements.
Okay, great, perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Rich Allen.
Hi. So basically I see three primary things going on here. One is cost per employee are going up, which I think we're all facing that. Some of that's decisions outside our control. I see projects that we're doing, you know, that we want done, right? And I'm seeing buildup of contingency or work we're expecting to come, that may come on the horizon that we want to be prepared for. So I can see the thought that went into this budget, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
You're doing what you need to do.
Mr. Ben.
On that just a question on this water improvement where you got the well number 9
Yes.
project. Would that, seems to me that that would be, you could use, also use water reimbursement funds for that project since it's building on new, is that correct?
You could, to a degree. I'd have to look back at some things to determine what the eligible proportions would be. But water reimbursement is fairly free to use on any capital project. Improvement funds are more restricted, much more restricted. So if it qualifies for improvement funds, then we would actually want to lean towards improvement funds because there's going to be a narrower group of projects that we're going to be able to use that money on. The reimbursement has a wider range, a broader span. So we want to try to keep, use those monies when we can't use other stuff because it's more restricted. The Well 9 project does qualify, if I remember, I have to look back at my CIP, but I think it qualifies 100% for improvement funds. It's been programmed into the SDC rate, so we've been collecting money over many years to do that. So it makes perfect sense to fund that entirely out of improvement if we can. As Eric sort of touched on earlier, this will actually be, all told, quite a long-term project because we don't have enough improvement money to do the entire job tip to tail in the next couple of years. Our plan is, what we do have enough money to do is we're just basically just finished up the siting study. The final ink's getting put on that report. Then we're gonna go into a design, and we can afford to do that, and we can afford to drill the well, test it, get our water rights certified there with our claim of beneficial use, and then that'll probably be getting close to as much money as we have available in the near term. But that's fine. We're going to get that done. The well will be there, and then 2, 3, 4, however many years it takes to build up enough money down the road. Then we'll go back and build the actual full pump house and the transmission main to bring it fully online onto the system. And also by doing as much of that work in advance as we can, we're hopefully saving some money on construction inflationary costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also that if for some reason you had the need quicker than you expected for well number 9, you could dip into the reimbursement fund to help finish
We
it.
could go to reimbursement fund, we could even go to the water fund if we had to, or given the amounts of money we're talking about, what we might do in that case would be to go borrow through the state revolving loan fund, something like that. I'm not a big fan of borrowing money for this stuff if I can avoid it. But if we had to, that's what we have, various resources we can go to get money, in fairly short order, typically on a loan basis. Or, who knows? In a couple of years, there may be some big federal infrastructure grant that comes down and we get money there. That's a possibility too.
So if the whole thing from beginning to end for well number 9, about how much money is that? Are you looking at
Oh boy, I'm
$1
trying to remember
million?
what our estimate on that is. I think we're thinking it's going to be around $1.5 million. Yeah, that's about, I think, what we're thinking right now. Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't have to pay that to drill the well.
Yeah, well, that's not just to drill the well.
Oh, no, I
Yeah.
Okay, so the last grouping, the utilities undergrounding fund, it's specialized, it's held aside, the funds go in there, it's strictly used for the undergrounding of electricity, funded from that special source from the utility bills from PGE. We continue to accumulate the funds in there, and we continue to appropriate the funds so that if there's the opportunity to do something with PGE, we have access to the funds. We budgeted everything that was available in this year. We're not going to spend $2-3 million out of that fund this year because PGE's not going to be able to do anything between now and June 30th in that regard. But again, we're budgeting for it for the coming cycle. Bike and Path Trails Fund, that one it's basically limited. We ended up borrowing funds to finish out the Robbins Way Trail. And so the Bike Path Trails Fund has I think I've got it scheduled out to be a 4-year loan from the Parks SDC Fund. And so it's repaying money each year back to the Parks SDC fund from its revenue. And again, its source is the 1% of the state gas tax. So that's really the activity that's happening in that fund. Street tree fund, again, is very narrow, it's only for that purpose, and it has a very low volume of activity. The Parks Improvement Fund, page 239, that's the, essentially the SDC fund for, on the park side, and the capital improvement piece of it, page 143, that's where you see the reference to the 6% for the skate spot that was talked about earlier. That's in there, as well as some of the other projects that we're continue to carry forward on the capital side. Also in that fund is budgeted on the previous page on 242, that 1.5 million that I mentioned that we're going to loan to the URA so that they have the funds for the matching for the grant for the building of the URA trail. And then the last one is the Sam Cox Building Maintenance Fund. It's having some minor improvements, some equipment or some furniture, chairs and table stuff replacement. We've been working on getting the AV system a little bit better functional to support Parks Advisory Committee meetings and potentially other committee meetings down there. The coming year's budget is fairly low key. It also has a loan from the Parks SDC fund that it's having to repay. So it's collecting its rental fees and making its fund repayments from the loan from a few years ago when we had to deal with the roof and the siding. So it's not anything particularly exciting. So that is the end of those.
Mr. Bent.
On my pet peeve, the utility undergrounding. Ray gave me some good answers on it. Said the county didn't get the grant this year, but they're really pushing hard for it to try to get that grant this year. If for some reason they can't get the grant, and they have the same problem, it just gets moving forward. That grant is only going to cover the portion over the Beaver Creek, right?
Well, yeah, I think the grant's really just part of the story. To me, the bigger headline is just PGE. They're not as willing to, they're not as eager to work on these projects. So we kind of have to coax, cajole, drag them along to get these projects going. And they throw up some hoops for us. This is something that's kind of been on the back burner since prior to the departure of the previous public works director, so a little over a year now. He was trying to get them going on this. I intend to re-engage that, get back in the ring with PGE and try to make them move on this thing. Because even if the grant doesn't come through, and I do want to give a shout out to the county folks, particularly folks in their stormwater department that's been fighting really hard to try to get some grant money for that crossing. Even if that doesn't come through, there's still a project that can be done, but it still requires the cooperation of PGE. And while they don't say no, they're not as motivated as they used to be. They used to be very motivated to get their utilities undergrounded. And so now it's a bit of a process to get them going on this stuff. And it requires persistence, which requires time on our part. And so we just haven't had that time within the last year or so, but we definitely want to come back to it and try to get them going on this thing.
One of the other things that's kind of slowed it down, and correct me if I'm wrong, Travis, but they used to have a department within PGE who kind of did the engineering designs of the undergrounding, and then they closed that department of PGE, and so now they kind of go, okay, well, but how do we design it? Are you guys going to design it for us to approve? I mean, they've kind of lost that piece within PGE that used to help put these plans together, and they're just not really sure how to proceed forward.
Yeah, they used to have a group that could take this on much more holistically and do it more turnkey for us. And now they want to, they need us to do a lot more on our end to make it happen. And they kind of throw things out there that are like, well, okay, do you really need us to do that? Because, you know, and that's where some of these conversations got stalled, I think, previously, the last attempt. But, you know, I 100% am eager to get back to the table with them and try to get them to make this happen.
What about subs? I see a lot of subs working on big electrical projects that are PGE lines, just recently on 257.
Sure, I mean, those are contractors typically.
Yeah.
So they're design folks. When I say they used to do these things more holistically, they would design the whole project, you know, we would give them the money to do so. Now they'll only work on part of it. They'll only do the electrical layout stuff. You know, they want the city to pitch in more on things like if sidewalk has to be taken up and replaced. They want us to do stuff separately for that. So that complicates the whole process and has really sort of gummed up the works, whereas it used to be, we would sit down then with a hammer out an agreement, they'd go away, they would basically do everything, and then we would write them a check, you know? And now it's a much more difficult process to get things put together to actually make a project happen.
And hopefully you could use that yellow machine to excavate.
Well, we're hoping not to do any of the work ourselves because those guys are busy with their own thing, but, you know.
Well, I mean, but I don't mean the city people to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the subcontractor
Right.
or PGE to do it, and they wouldn't have to tear up all the sidewalks and all the other infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on which route you're talking about. The one we're looking at.
Troutdale Road.
Right, Troutdale Road, that's one of the challenges there is there's some right-of-way limitations in some places, so you have to go underneath the sidewalk, which complicates the project. And it's more challenging than it used to be, unfortunately.
I know you can handle it.
Any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Okay, with that, we will be back here Wednesday night, 6 o'clock again. And we should probably keep our schedules open for next Monday evening because that will be our third meeting if we need it. So set your DVR, whatever you need to do, whatever can be on Monday night, just in case. Okay, and with that, I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention and entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
Make a motion that we adjourn for the evening.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Commissioner Wittrin, Councilor Wittrin, I'm sorry, and seconded by Victoria Rizzo. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all. See you Wednesday. I know, I'm sorry.